I am just a chronicler and welcome you to another video. Since I know many of you watch to relax and fall asleep, I thought it would be nice if you left a comment telling me where you're listening from and if it's raining there. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Now, it's time to get comfortable, relax, and begin. I should have known something was off when the GPS lost signal halfway up the mountain. But there I was, white-knuckling the steering wheel of our rental car, with Sarah next to me trying to figure out the old-school paper map we'd grabbed as an afterthought. "I think we missed a turn about a mile back," she said, squinting at the faded lines. I sighed, feeling the tension creep into my shoulders. Great. Just great. We'd been planning this weekend getaway for months. A secluded cabin in the woods, no cell service, no Wi-Fi, just us, nature, and a chance to reconnect away from the chaos of city life. Now, as the sun dipped below the tree line and shadows stretched across the narrow dirt road, I was starting to think we should have stuck with a normal hotel. Just as I was about to suggest turning back, Sarah's face lit up. "There, I see a mailbox." Sure enough, a rustic wooden mailbox appeared around the bend, barely visible in the fading light. The reflective numbers matched the address we'd been given. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and steered the car onto an even narrower path leading into a clearing. The cabin materialized out of the gloom like something from a storybook. To stories of weathered logs, a wide porch, and windows glowing with warm, inviting light. It was exactly like the pictures online, but somehow more real, more isolated. As we stepped out of the car, the silence hit me like a physical thing. No traffic noise, no distant voices, not even the hum of power lines. Just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the crunch of gravel under our feet. Sarah breathed in deeply, a smile spreading across her face. "Smell that air. This is exactly what we needed." I nodded, trying to shake off my unease. "Yeah, it's something else." We grabbed our bags and headed for the porch. A note was taped to the front door. "Welcome. Key is under the blue flower pot. Make yourselves at home and enjoy your stay." Management, I muttered, glancing around the empty clearing. Right. The interior of the cabin was cozy and well maintained, all knotty pine and plaid upholstery. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the living room, and the kitchen gleamed with newer appliances than I'd expected. Sarah flopped onto the oversized couch with a contented sigh. "This place is perfect. I can already feel the stress melting away." I had to admit, it was pretty nice. As I unpacked our groceries, I could feel myself starting to relax. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. We spent that first evening exploring the cabin, marveling at the little touches that made it feel homey. Old board games stacked in a corner, a bookshelf filled with well-worn paperbacks, even a telescope set up by one of the upstairs windows. "Check this out," Sarah called from the master bedroom. "The view is incredible." I joined her at the window, and my breath caught. The cabin sat on a small ridge, overlooking a vast expanse of wilderness. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow even in late spring. With the sun fully set, a riot of stars blazed overhead, more than I'd ever seen in my life. "Okay," I admitted, wrapping an arm around her waist. This might have been a good idea after all. We turned in early that night, worn out from the drive and lulled by the profound quiet. I drifted off almost immediately, Sarah's steady breathing beside me a familiar comfort. It was the scratching that woke me. At first, I thought I was dreaming. A faint, rhythmic sound, like fingernails dragging slowly across wood. I blinked in the darkness, disoriented. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Scratch. It was coming from inside the walls. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. The noise stopped. "Sarah," I whispered, shaking her gently. "Sarah, wake up." She stirred, mumbling sleepily. "Wow, what's wrong?" "Listen," I said, holding my breath. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, just as Sarah opened her mouth to speak, it started again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Her eyes widened. "What is that?" "I don't know," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Probably just a mouse or something." Sarah sat up, pulling the blankets tighter around herself. "That doesn't sound like a mouse." I swung my legs out of bed, fumbling for my phone on the nightstand. The screen's glow seemed harsh in the darkness. 2:17 a.m. "I'll go check it out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The scratching continued as I made my way downstairs, using my phone as a makeshift flashlight. It seemed to be coming from the living room. I swept the beam across the walls, half expecting to see something skittering away. Nothing. I pressed my ear against the wall, wincing at the cold wood. The scratching was louder here, more insistent. It didn't sound like any rodent I'd ever heard. The rhythm was too deliberate. Suddenly, it stopped. The silence rushed back in, broken only by the pounding of my heart. I waited, straining to hear, but whatever it was seemed to have gone. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the horrors of the night seeming far away in the cheerful sunlight. Sarah and I laughed off our fears over breakfast, blaming overactive imaginations and too many scary movies. We spent the day hiking, marveling at the unspoiled beauty of the forest. By the time we returned to the cabin, pleasantly exhausted and sun-warmed, the scratching was all but forgotten. It wasn't until I was building a fire that evening that I noticed something odd. As I moved the heavy armchair away from the fireplace, I saw marks on the floorboards. Long, parallel grooves, as if something sharp had been dragged across the wood. "Hey, Sarah," I called, keeping my voice casual. "Come look at this." She came over, frowning as she knelt to examine the marks. "Huh? Maybe the previous guests moved the furniture around." "Maybe," I said, not quite convinced. The grooves looked fresh, the wood pale where it had been scraped away. We tried to brush it off, but I could tell Sarah was unsettled too. We kept the conversation light as we ate dinner, but there was an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. That night, we both jolted awake at the first scratch. It was louder this time, more frantic. No longer confined to the walls, it seemed to be coming from all around us. The floor, the ceiling, even the goddamn furniture. Sarah clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "What's happening?" I shook my head, at a loss for words. The scratching built to a crescendo, a maddening cacophony that set my teeth on edge. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. We spent the rest of the night huddled together on the couch, jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin settling. When dawn finally broke, we were both bleary-eyed and on edge. "We should leave," Sarah said, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. I nodded, already gathering our things. Yeah, this isn't right." We packed in record time, hauling our bags out to the car without bothering to clean up. I just wanted to put this place in our rearview mirror as quickly as possible. I turned the key in the ignition. Nothing happened. I tried again, my heart sinking as the engine refused to turn over. Not even a click. It was as if all the power had been drained from the battery. "No," Sarah whispered, the color draining from her face. No. I got out and popped the hood, but I knew it was useless. I'm no mechanic, and even if I was, we were miles from the nearest auto parts store. We were well and truly stuck. As I slammed the hood in frustration, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone was standing on the porch of the cabin. I turned, relief flooding through me. Maybe the owners had shown up, or another guest. Someone who could help. The figure was rail-thin, unnaturally tall. It stood perfectly still, head cocked at an odd angle, and its hands. Its hands were tipped with long, curved claws. As I watched, frozen in horror, it slowly raised one hand and dragged those claws across the wooden siding of the cabin. Scratch, 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 scratch. A scream built in my throat, but before I could release it, the thing was gone. Between one blink and the next, the porch was empty. I ran back to the car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the door handle. Sarah was saying something, her voice high and panicked, but I couldn't make out the words over the roaring in my ears. As I threw myself into the driver's seat, motion in the rearview mirror caught my eye. I looked up, my blood turning to ice. The thing was in the back seat, its lipless mouth stretched in a grotesque parody of a smile. Those horrible claws reached for us, and I knew with sickening certainty that the real nightmare was only just beginning. Story 2. The first rays of dawn filtered through the canopy, painting my tent in dappled light. I stretched, savoring the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. This was why I loved solo camping. Just me and the wilderness, no distractions. I unzipped the tent flap and crawled out, ready to start my day. That's when I noticed it. My backpack, which I had left propped against a nearby tree, was now sitting neatly in front of my tent. Mustaf moved it in my sleep and forgotten. Shrugging it off, I set about making breakfast. The familiar routine of boiling water for coffee and oatmeal helped shake off the last cobwebs of sleep. As I ate, I planned my hike for the day. I'd found the secluded spot off the main trail yesterday, and I was eager to explore further. Packing up my day pack, I made sure to secure the rest of my gear inside the tent. No sense in tempting any curious critters. With a final glance around the campsite, I set off into the woods. The forest was alive with sound. Birds calling, leaves rustling, the distant bubble of a stream. I breathed deeply, feeling the tension of city life melting away with each step. This was exactly what I needed. Hours passed as I hiked, marking my trail and taking photos of interesting plants and rock formations. As the sun climbed higher, I decided to head back to camp for lunch. Something felt off as I approached my campsite. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Then I realized my tent had been moved. Not by much, maybe a foot or two, but I was certain it wasn't where I'd left it. "Hello," I called out, scanning the surrounding trees. "Is someone there?" Silence answered me. A chill ran down my spine despite the warm afternoon sun. I approached the tent cautiously, half expecting to find it ransacked, but everything seemed to be in order. My gear was untouched. Nothing was missing, just slightly rearranged. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. Probably just an animal. But what kind of animal neatly repositions a tent? I tried to shake off my unease as I made lunch, but I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder. The forest that had seemed so welcoming this morning now felt oppressive, the shadows between the trees deeper and more menacing. As I cleaned up after eating, I noticed something glinting at the edge of the clearing. Curious, I went to investigate. Half buried in the leaf litter was a small stone can, a stack of smooth river rocks balanced with careful precision. I was sure it hadn't been there earlier. "Hello," I called again, louder this time. "This isn't funny. Show yourself." Nothing but the whisper of wind through the leaves. I debated packing up and leaving, but the thought of hiking back in my current rattled state seemed worse than staying put. Besides, I told myself, I was probably overreacting. Maybe some other hiker had passed through while I was out and decided to play a prank. Yeah, that had to be it. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my campsite, nervously whittling sticks and trying to lose myself in a paperback. As dusk approached, I built up the campfire, taking comfort in its warm glow and crackling flames. That night, I dreamed of eyes watching me from the darkness. I woke with a start, heart pounding. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint red glow over the campsite. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing at the edge of the light. But when I blinked, it was gone. Sleep didn't come easy after that. The next morning, I crawled out of my tent to find my campsite had been rearranged. The fire pit had been neatly cleaned out. Fresh tinder and kindling stacked nearby. My cooking gear, which I'd left by the fire, was now hanging from tree branches in a bizarre mobile. And there, right in the center of it all, was another cairn. Larger this time, with a small white flower placed on top. My hands shook as I took down my cooking gear. This was beyond a prank. I didn't know what this was, but it scared the hell out of me. I'd had enough. Forget breakfast. I was getting out of here. I turned to my tent, ready to break camp, and froze. There, scratched into the dirt in front of the entrance, was a crude stick figure. A childish drawing, but unmistakable in its meaning. A person, arms outstretched, like a welcome, or a warning. "Nope," I said aloud, my voice sounding thin and scared. "Nope, nope, nope." I threw my gear into my backpack haphazardly, not bothering with my usual careful packing. In record time, I had the tent down and stuffed into its bag. I didn't even bother trying to erase my campsite. I just wanted out. With one last nervous glance around the clearing, I shouldered my pack and headed for the trail, or where I thought the trail was. In my panic, I'd lost track of which direction I'd come from. "Okay, don't freak out," I told myself, trying to slow my breathing. "You marked the trail. Just find your markers." I picked a direction that looked familiar and started walking, scanning the trees for the bright orange tape I'd used to mark my path. But after 10 minutes of increasingly frantic searching, I had to admit the truth. I was lost. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I sank to the ground, my pack suddenly feeling twice as heavy. This couldn't be happening. I was an experienced hiker. I knew better than this. As I sat there, trying to get my panic under control, I noticed something carved into the trunk of a nearby tree. At first, I thought it was just natural scarring in the bark, but as I looked closer, I could make out a crude arrow shape, pointing deeper into the woods. I stared at it, my mind racing. Should I follow it? What if it was a trap? But what choice did I have? With shaking legs, I stood and started walking in the direction the arrow indicated. Every few trees, I found another carving. Arrows, stick figures, spirals. A trail of breadcrumbs leading me. Where the forest grew denser, the underbrush thicker. I had to fight my way through in some spots, thorns catching at my clothes. The canopy overhead blotted out more and more sunlight, until I was walking in a perpetual green twilight. Just as I was about to give up and try backtracking, the trees opened up into a small clearing, and there, in the center, was my tent. Perfectly pitched, campfire laid and ready to light. My gear neatly arranged around the site. I stared, uncomprehending. This wasn't possible. I'd packed everything up. I'd been walking for hours. How? A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, my heart in my throat. At the edge of the clearing stood a figure, tall and thin, with limbs that seemed to long for its body. Its skin was the color of tree bark, rough and knotted, and its eyes were black as pitch, reflecting no light. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't respond. Slowly, deliberately, the creature raised one gnarled hand and pointed at the tent. Then, with a motion so swift I almost missed it, it melted back into the shadows of the forest. I stood there, rooted to the spot, for a long time. The shadows lengthened as the sun began to set, but still I couldn't bring myself to move. What was I supposed to do now? Part of me wanted to run, to keep running until I found a road, a town, anything. But another part was curious. Terrified, yes, but curious. Why had it brought me here? Why go to all this trouble? As if in a dream, I found myself moving towards the tent. My hand shook as I unzipped the flap. Inside, laid out on my sleeping bag, was a book. Ancient looking, bound in what looked like tree bark, its pages yellow and brittle with age. And there, on the first page, written in a spidery hand, "Welcome, traveler. We've been waiting for you." I looked up, out into the darkening woods, and somewhere, just beyond the firelight, I saw eyes watching me, waiting. I knew I should be afraid. I knew I should run. But as I stood there, the old book in my hands, I felt something else. A sense of belonging, of coming home. Slowly, I sat down by the fire pit. With trembling hands, I struck a match and touched it to the kindling. As the flames caught and grew, I opened the book and began to read. Story 3. The moving truck hadn't even pulled away before he was at our door. All smiles and southern charm. Well, howdy there, neighbors. Name's Frank. Frank Pearson. Thought I'd come on over and introduce myself, seeing as we'll be living next door to each other and all. I blinked, caught off guard by his enthusiasm. My wife, Sarah, recovering quicker, stepped forward with a polite smile. "Hi, Frank. Nice to meet you. I'm Sarah, and this is my husband, Tom. We just moved in, as you can probably tell." Frank's grin widened, if that was even possible. "Oh, I can tell all right. Been watching y'all unpack all morning. Looks like quite the job you've got ahead of you." A faint alarm bell rang in the back of my mind at his words. He'd been watching us all morning. But before I could dwell on it, Frank was talking again. "Say, how about I bring over some of my famous chili later? Help you folks settle in, proper like Sarah." Ever the diplomat, accepted graciously. As Frank headed back to his house with a jaunty wave, I couldn't shake a vague sense of unease. "Bit forward, isn't he?" I muttered. Sarah elbowed me gently. "Oh, stop. He's just being neighborly. It's sweet." I nodded, trying to push away my reservations. This was a fresh start for us. New town, new jobs, new home. No need to let my natural cynicism color things so soon. Frank was true to his word, showing up that evening with a steaming pot of chili and a six-pack of local craft beer. I had to admit, the food was delicious, and Frank proved to be an engaging conversationalist. By the time he left, even I was warming up to our overly friendly neighbor. The next few days passed in a blur of unpacking and settling in. Frank was a constant presence, always ready with a helping hand or a cold drink. It was nice, I suppose. if a little overwhelming. It was about a week after we'd moved in that I first noticed something odd. I was looking for my favorite coffee mug, the one Sarah had given me on our first anniversary. I could have sworn I'd unpacked it and put it in the kitchen cupboard, but it wasn't there. "Hey, hun," I called out. "Have you seen my Star Wars mug?" Sarah appeared in the doorway, a puzzled look on her face. "It should be in the cupboard." I remember unpacking it myself. We searched the entire kitchen, but the mug was nowhere to be found. It wasn't a big deal, really, just a mug. But it nagged at me. The next day, I noticed my running shoes weren't where I'd left them by the front door. I found them in the closet instead. Then it was Sarah's favorite book, which turned up in a different room. Small things, easy to explain away as absent-mindedness in the chaos of moving. But they kept happening. It was Frank who found my mug, oddly enough. He'd stopped by again, and was helping himself to coffee as usual, when he pulled it out of the cupboard. "Hey, this is a neat mug. You a big Star Wars fan, Tom?" I stared at the mug in his hand, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Yeah, I managed. Where did you find that?" Frank looked at me quizzically. "Right here in the cupboard. Where else would it be?" I mumbled something non-committal and took the mug, my mind racing. I knew it hadn't been there. We'd looked, both of us. As the days went on, I found myself growing increasingly paranoid. Things in our house kept shifting, appearing in places they shouldn't be. And Frank was always there. Always dropping by unannounced. Always letting himself in like he owned the place. "I don't like it," I told Sarah one night after Frank had finally left. "It's not normal how often he's here." Single quote Sarah sighed, looking tired. "He's just lonely, Tom. You know he's divorced, lives alone. I think he's just happy to have company. But doesn't it seem weird to you? How he always knows things about us. Things we haven't told him." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I struggled to put it into words. Like, yesterday, he asked how your presentation went. But I never told him you had a presentation. "Did you?" Sarah's frown deepened. "No, I don't think so. But maybe I mentioned it in passing and forgot. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But the doubt had taken root, and it was growing. The breaking point came about a month after we'd moved in. I woke up in the middle of the night, parched. As I headed to the kitchen for a glass of water, I heard a noise from the living room. Soft, like someone trying to be quiet. My heart pounding, I crept down the hallway. The living room was dark, but in the faint light from the street lamps outside, I could make out a figure moving around. I fumbled for the light switch and flicked it on. Frank stood in the middle of our living room, looking for all the world like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Frank," I managed, my voice strangled. "What the hell are you doing in our house?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, hey there, Tom. Didn't mean to wake you. Just, thought I heard a noise over here. Came to check it out." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "You heard a noise from your house? So you broke into ours?" Frank's smile faltered. Now, I didn't break in. You folks gave me a key, remember, for emergencies. We hadn't. I was absolutely certain we hadn't given this man a key to our home. "I think you should leave," I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. Frank's face darkened for a moment, a flash of something ugly crossing his features. But it was gone so quickly, I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Sure thing, neighbor. Sorry for the disturbance." He headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. You folks really should be more careful though. Never know what might happen if you leave your door unlocked. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the suddenly too quiet house. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Instead, I went through the house, checking every lock, every window. And as I did, I started noticing things. Little things that were out of place. A photo album moved to a different shelf. Sarah's jewelry box slightly ajar. My laptop opened when I was sure I'd closed it. When Sarah woke up, I told her everything. To my relief, she believed me. We spent the morning changing our locks and installing a security system. We debated calling the police, but what could we tell them? That our neighbor was too friendly. That things in our house moved around. It sounded crazy. Hell, I was starting to think I was crazy. But then Sarah gasped, staring at her phone. "Tom," she said, her voice shaking. "Look at this." She handed me her phone. It was open to Frank's Facebook page. And there, in his photos, was our living room, our kitchen, our bedroom. Dozens of pictures, all taken inside our house when we weren't home. But it was the captions that made my blood run cold. My new place is coming together nicely. Love what I've done with the kitchen, home sweet home. I looked up at Sarah, seeing my own horror reflected in her eyes. "We need to leave," I said. "Now." We threw some clothes and essentials into bags, not bothering to pack properly. As we rushed out to the car, I saw Frank standing on his porch, watching us with that same wide grin. "Going somewhere, neighbors," he called out. I didn't answer, just threw our bags in the trunk and got in the driver's seat. As we pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Frank was still there, still smiling, and he was waving. Not goodbye, welcome home. We drove in silence for a while, both of us too shaken to speak. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "Where are we going?" I realized I had no idea. We couldn't go back, that much was clear. But where could we go that Frank couldn't follow? As if reading my thoughts, Sarah's phone pinged with a new notification. With trembling hands, she read it aloud. "New post from Frank Pearson. Born voyage, neighbors. Don't worry, I'll take good care of the place while you're gone. Can't wait for you to come home." I pressed down harder on the accelerator, watching the familiar streets of our new neighborhood fade away in the mirror. But no matter how far or fast we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd never truly escape. After all, home is where the heart is. And Frank was already there, waiting for us to return. Story 4. The keys jingled in my hand as I locked my car, the sound echoing across the empty parking lot. I looked up at the abandoned factory looming before me, its broken windows like dead eyes staring down. My new workplace for the next 8 hours. "You've got this, Jake," I muttered to myself, straightening my security guard uniform. "It's just an old building. Nothing to be scared of." As I approached the main entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavier here, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. I shook my head, trying to dispel the notion. First night jitters, that's all it was. The lock clicked open, and I stepped inside, immediately enveloped by darkness and the musty smell of neglect. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing dust-covered machinery and debris scattered across the floor. I made my way to the security office, a small room near the entrance that had been retrofitted with modern equipment. Banks of monitors lined one wall, showing grainy feeds from cameras placed throughout the factory. A desk with a computer and a mini-fridge completed the setup. "Home sweet home," I said to no one in particular, settling into the creaky office chair. The night started quietly enough. I did my rounds, checking doors and windows, marking my progress in the logbook. The factory was huge, a maze of corridors and vast open spaces filled with silent machines. My footsteps echoed off the high ceilings, the beam of my flashlight creating monstrous shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. It was during my second round, sometime after midnight, that I first heard it. A faint noise, like metal scraping against metal. I froze, listening intently. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Then, there it was again. A distant clang, followed by a drawn-out screech. My heart rate picked up as I swept my flashlight around, searching for the source. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the cavernous space. "Is someone there?" Silence answered me. I radioed it in, just to be safe. "Bass, this is Jake. I'm hearing some strange noises in Sector 3. Going to investigate." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Jake. Be careful out there." I moved cautiously through the factory, every sense on high alert. The noise didn't repeat, but now that I was listening for it, I became aware of other sounds. Tiny clicks and pops, the groan of settling metal. Sounds you'd expect in an old building, but which now took on a more sinister quality. By the time I finished my sweep and returned to the office, I was jumpy and on edge. I slumped into my chair, rubbing my eyes. The monitors flickered before me, showing empty rooms and hallways. Wait, was that? I leaned forward, squinting at one of the screens. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw movement, a shadow darting across the frame. But when I looked again, there was nothing. "You're losing it, man," I told myself, leaning back and taking a swig from my water bottle. "It's just an empty factory." The rest of the night passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. As I locked up at dawn, I found myself looking forward to going home and putting this place behind me. If only I'd known then that this was just the beginning. The next few nights followed a similar pattern. Strange noises would echo through the factory, always just out of sight. The cameras would catch fleeting glimpses of movement, gone before I could focus on them. Each time I investigated, I found nothing out of place. No sign that anyone else had been there. But things were moving. I was sure of it. Small objects would be in different positions when I made my rounds. A wrench that had been on a workbench now on the floor. A pile of papers rearranged. Tiny changes that I might not have noticed if I hadn't been so on edge. By the end of the week, I was a nervous wreck. I wasn't sleeping well during the day, my dreams filled with shadowy figures and clanging machinery. I thought about quitting, but I needed this job. And a part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, was curious. What was really going on in this factory at night? It was on my 8th night that things escalated. I was doing my usual rounds when all the lights suddenly flickered on, flooding the factory floor with harsh fluorescent light. I stumbled, momentarily blinded, my heart pounding in my chest. "What the hell?" I muttered, blinking rapidly as my eyes adjusted. The lights went out just as abruptly, plunging me back into darkness. But in that brief moment of illumination, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the far side of the room, stood a figure. Tall and unnaturally thin, its proportions all wrong, and it was looking right at me. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran back to the security office and slammed the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. With shaking hands, I pulled up the camera feeds, frantically scanning for any sign of the figure. Nothing. Just empty rooms and hallways. I stayed in that office for the rest of my shift, eyes glued to the monitors. The radio sat silent beside me. I couldn't bring myself to call it in. What would I say? That I saw a ghost? A monster? They'd think I was crazy. maybe I was. As dawn approached, I steeled myself for one final round. I had to check the factory before I left. It was my job, after all. With my flashlight in one hand and my baton in the other, I ventured out. The factory was quiet, almost peaceful in the early morning light, filtering through the dirty windows. I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing when I turned a corner and stopped dead in my tracks. There, scratched into the concrete floor, was a message. "We see you, Jake." My name. My goddamn name. I don't remember much of what happened next. Somehow, I finished my rounds and locked up. I drove home in a daze, my mind's racing. I should quit. I should run. I should tell someone. But who would believe me? I didn't sleep at all that day. Instead, I pored over the security footage, looking for any evidence of what I'd seen. There was nothing concrete, just those same fleeting shadows, those split-second movements at the edge of the frame. But now, knowing what to look for, I started to see patterns. Whatever was in the factory, it was smart. It knew where the cameras were and how to avoid them. That night, as I drove to work, I felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. Part of me was terrified of what I might find, but another part, a part I didn't quite understand, was excited. I wanted answers. The factory was quiet when I arrived, almost expectant. I did my rounds mechanically, hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow, but nothing happened. Hours ticked by, and still nothing. It wasn't until near the end of my shift that everything changed. I was sitting in the office, staring blankly at the monitors, when the screens suddenly went black. All of them at the same time. I jolted upright, my heart hammering. No, 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 I muttered, frantically trying to reboot the system. Nothing worked. Then, one by one, the screens flickered back to life. But they weren't showing the factory anymore. Instead, each monitor displayed a different angle of me. Me sitting in the office chair, staring at the screens in horror. I whirled around, looking for the cameras, but there were none. The images on the screen moved as I moved, perfectly synchronized. A message appeared across the bottom of each screen. "We've been watching you. Jake, now it's time for you to join us." The door to the office swung open on its own, revealing the dark corridor beyond. And there, just at the edge of the darkness, I saw them. Dozens of figures, their proportions twisted and wrong, their eyes gleaming in the low light. They were waiting for me. I'd like to say I was brave, that I stood my ground or fought back, but the truth is, I ran. I ran out of that office and through the factory, the sound of inhuman laughter echoing behind me. I didn't stop until I reached my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The factory stood silent and dark, betraying no hint of the horrors within. But I knew the truth now. I knew what happened in that place when the sun went down. I never went back to that job. Never even went to collect my last paycheck. Some things are more important than money. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the distant clang of machinery. And in my dreams, I'm back in that factory, running through endless corridors while unseen eyes watch from the shadows. Always watching, always waiting for me to join them. Story 5. The GPS blinked, recalculating for the third time in as many minutes. I squinted at the device, then at the unfamiliar road stretching out before us, bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun. "I think we should turn back," Lisa said from the passenger seat, her voice tight with worry. "This doesn't feel right." I sighed, knuckling the steering wheel. It's fine. The GPS says this is a shortcut. We'll save at least an hour. Lisa bit her lip, glancing out the window at the dense forest, pressing in on both sides of the narrow, unmarked road. If you say so. I didn't blame her for being nervous. We'd left the main highway about 20 minutes ago, following the GPS's insistent directions onto this barely paved track. It wasn't on any of our maps, but the navigation system seemed confident. As we drove deeper into the gathering dusk, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. The trees seemed to lean over the road, their branches reaching for us like gnarled fingers. The pavement, already rough, gave way to gravel that crunched ominously under our tires. Maybe we should, Lisa began, but her words were cut off as we rounded a bend in the world. Shifted, for a moment. Just a heartbeat, everything seemed to blur. The trees, the road, even the car itself became indistinct, like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. Then, as quickly as it had come, the sensation passed. I blinked hard, shaking my head to clear it. Did you feel that? Lisa nodded, her face pale in the dashboard light. What was it? Some kind of earthquake? I don't know, I muttered, peering out the windshield. The road looked the same, endless gravel stretching into the deepening twilight. But something felt off. I glanced at the GPS, hoping for some clarity. The screen was frozen, the little car icon spinning in place. Great. Let's turn around, Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, Mark. I really don't like this. I nodded, slowing the car. Yeah, okay. This was a bad idea. I pulled to a stop, ready to execute a three-point turn on the narrow road. But as I shifted into reverse, I caught sight of something in the rearview mirror that made my blood run cold. The road behind us was gone. Where we had just driven, there was nothing but unbroken forest, trees packed so densely it looked like an impenetrable wall of green and black. What the hell? I breathed, twisting in my seat for a better look. Lisa followed my gaze, her eyes widening. Mark, what's going on? I shook my head, unable to form words. This wasn't possible. We'd just come down this road. It had to be there. With shaking hands, I put the car in drive and pressed the gas. The only way now was forward. As we continued down the seemingly endless road, I became aware of other changes. The quality of the light was different. For one, though the sun had been setting when we turned onto this road, it now seemed to be stuck in a permanent state of twilight, neither day nor night. And the trees, I could have sworn they were moving, not swaying in the wind. There was no wind, the air outside eerily still, but actually changing position. More than once, I was certain I saw a gap in the forest that vanished. When I looked directly at it, Lisa's phone chirped, making us both jump. She fumbled it out of her pocket, hope flaring in her eyes. Maybe we've got signal again. But her face fell as she looked at the screen. It's just the clock. It says it's midnight. I glanced at my watch. 7:45 p.m. We'd only been on this road for half an hour, tops. That's not possible, I said, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. Nothing about this was possible. We drove on, the gravel crunching under our tires, the only sound in the unnatural quiet. I kept expecting, hoping, really, to see some sign of civilization. A house, a gas station, even just a mile marker. Anything to break the monotony of trees and twilight. But there was nothing. Just the road, stretching endlessly before us. Mark, Lisa said, after what felt like hours, her voice trembling. Look at the gas gauge. I glanced down and felt my stomach drop. The needle was hovering just above empty. Impossible. We'd filled up right before turning off the highway. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Okay, we need to think. There has to be a way out of this." Lisa nodded, visibly pulling herself together. "Right, let's try to retrace our steps. What exactly happened when we turned onto this road?" I frowned, thinking back. The GPS told us to turn. It said it was a shortcut. And then everything went weird for a second, Lisa finished. Like the world blurred. "Yeah," I said slowly. "You think that's when, whatever this has happened?" She shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. But it's the only thing that stands out." I nodded, an idea forming. "So maybe if we can recreate that moment, we can undo it. Get back to the real road." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. We spent the next hour trying everything we could think of. Turning the car round, the road behind us reappeared, but it was just more of the same, driving at different speeds. Even closing our eyes and willing ourselves back to reality, nothing worked. As the gas gauge dipped lower and lower, desperation set in. We were trapped in some kind of nightmare, and we were running out of time. That's when we saw the light. At first, I thought I was imagining it. A faint glow on the horizon, barely visible through the trees. But as we drew closer, it grew brighter. Definite, unmistakable. "Is that?" Lisa breathed, hope creeping into her voice for the first time in hours. "Looks like a house," I said, my heart pounding. "Or a store, maybe." As we approached, the source of the light became clear. It was a gas station, its fluorescent lights a beacon in the darkness. An old-fashioned one, with analog pumps and a small convenience store attached. I pulled up to the pump, almost crying with relief. "We're saved," I said, grinning at Lisa. "We can fill up, ask for directions. Get the hell out of here." But Lisa wasn't smiling. She was staring at the store with a look of growing horror. "Mark," she said slowly, "look at the sign." I followed her gaze and felt my blood turn to ice. There, in faded letters above the door, was a name. Our name. Thompson's Gas and Grocery Des. "That's not possible," I stammered. "We don't own a gas station. We've never even been here before." Lisa's hand found mine, squeezing tight. "I don't think we should go in there." But what choice did we have? We were almost out of gas, lost in some kind of impossible place. This was our only chance at answers. "Stay here," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. "Lock the doors. I'll just be a minute." Lisa nodded, her face pale. "Be careful." I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my feet. The air was thick and still, heavy with the scent of gasoline and something else, something old and musty. As I approached the store, I could see a figure behind the counter through the grimy windows. My heart leapt. Another person, finally. But as I got closer, the figure resolved into a familiar shape. Familiar, but impossible. It was me. Not exactly me. This version was older, grayer, with deep lines etched into a face that had seen too much sun and too little joy, but unmistakably me. Our eyes met through the glass, and I saw recognition flare in his. My gaze. Then resignation. Sadness. He. I raised a hand and beckoned me inside. My feet moved of their own accord, carrying me to the door. As I reached for the handle, I glanced back at the car. Lisa was watching, her face a mask of fear and confusion. I wanted to run back to her, to drive away and never look back. But I knew, somehow, that this was where our journey had always been leading. this impossible place, this moment. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. My older self smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome home," he said, his voice, my voice, rough with disuse. "We've been waiting for you." And as the door swung shut behind me, I realized the truth. We hadn't taken a shortcut. We'd taken the long way round. Story 6. The notification pinged, drawing my eyes to the screen for what felt like the 100th time that hour. Another message from Darkstar82. I couldn't help the smile that spread across my face as I clicked to open it. "Hey Alex, check out this song. It's got that melancholy vibe you love." I clicked the link, and sure enough, the haunting melody that filled my room was exactly my style. It was uncanny how well Darkstar82 seemed to know my tastes after just a few weeks of chatting online. I typed back quickly, "Wow, spot on as usual. How do you do that?" The response came almost instantly. "Just paying attention. So, how was work today? Did that annoying co-worker Linda bother you again?" I frowned slightly. Had I mentioned Linda by name? I must have, though I couldn't specifically remember doing so. I shrugged it off and launched into a rant about my day, the tension in my shoulders easing as I vented to my new online friend. It had started innocently enough. A comment on our obscure music forum had turned into a private message, which had evolved into hours-long conversations about everything and nothing. Darkstar82 was witty, insightful, and seemed to genuinely care about what I had to say. In the loneliness of my small apartment in a big city, it was a lifeline I hadn't realized I'd been craving. As the weeks went by, our chats became more frequent, more intense. Darkstar82 always seemed to be online when I needed to talk, no matter the time of day or night. They remembered every detail I shared, often bringing up things I'd mentioned in passing days or even weeks before. It was during one of our late-night conversations that things started to feel off. "Darkstar82, you should really get that leaky faucet in your kitchen fixed. The dripping must drive you crazy at night." I stared at the screen, a chill running down my spine. I hadn't mentioned anything about a leaky faucet. I'd only noticed it myself that morning. "Me? How did you know about that?" There was a long pause before the reply came. Darkstar82. "Oh, didn't you mention it earlier? My mistake if not. I must have a good intuition." I laughed it off, but a seed of unease had been planted. Over the next few days, I found myself paying closer attention to our conversations, noting the little things that didn't quite add up. Darkstar82 knew about the book I'd just started reading, though I was sure I hadn't mentioned it. They commented on the new shirt I'd bought, even though I hadn't worn it yet or told anyone about it. Small things, easily explained away, but they started to pile up. One night, unable to sleep, I scrolled back through our chat history. I was looking for something specific, any mention I might have made of my address or exact location. To my relief, I found nothing. I'd been careful about that, at least. But as I read through our conversations, I noticed something strange. Darkstar82's messages were often predictive, mentioning things just before they happened in my life. It was as if they knew what was going to happen to me before I did. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. My mind kept wandering back to Darkstar82 and all the little inconsistencies. I jumped every time my phone buzzed, half expecting to see a message saying they knew I was onto them. When I got home that evening, I hesitated before opening my laptop. Part of me wanted to confront Darkstar82, to demand answers. But another part, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, was afraid of what those answers might be. Finally, I logged on. There was a message waiting for me. Darkstar82. "Hey Alex, You seem distracted today. Everything okay? I felt my heart rate pick up. How could they know I was distracted? Me, I'm fine. Just tired. How was your day? Darkstar 82. Oh, you know, the usual. But let's talk about you. I'm worried about you, Alex. You haven't been sleeping well, have you? My hands were shaking as I typed my reply. Me? How do you know that? Darkstar 82. I told you, I pay attention. I care about you, Alex. I notice these things. Me, but how? How do you notice things you couldn't possibly know? There was a long pause. I held my breath, watching the Darkstar 82's typing message blink on and off. Darkstar 82. I think it's time we met in person, don't you? I can explain everything. I felt a jolt of fear mixed with a perverse curiosity. This was my chance to get answers, to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy. Me, okay? Where and when? Darkstar 82. How about that little coffee shop you like? The one with the blue awning on 7th Street. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'd never mention that coffee shop to Darkstar 82. Never. Me. Who are you? Really, Darkstar 82? A friend, Alex. Just a friend who knows you better than you know yourself. See you tomorrow. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding. What had I just agreed to? Should I go to the police? But what would I tell them? That my online friend knew too much about me. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning as my mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. By morning, I'd convinced myself not to go to the meeting. It was too dangerous, too unknown. But as 2 p.m. approached, I found myself walking towards the coffee shop, almost against my will. I had to know. I had to see who Darkstar 82 really was. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, my eyes scanning the room. It was nearly empty, just a barista behind the counter and a couple in the corner. Alex, I turned towards the voice and felt my world tilt sideways. Sitting at a table by the window was me, or someone who looked exactly like me, down to the small scar on my chin from a childhood accident. What? Who? I stammered, unable to form a coherent thought. The other me smiled, but it didn't reach their eyes. Sit down, Alex. We have a lot to talk about. In a daze, I sank into the chair across from my doppelganger. Up close, I could see subtle differences. This version of me looked older, more worn. There was a hardness in their eyes that I didn't recognize. I know you have questions, they said, their voice, my voice, sending chills down my spine. I'll try to answer them as best I can. Who are you? I managed to croak out. They sighed, running a hand through their hair. A gesture so familiar it made my head spin. I'm you, Alex. Or rather, I'm who you become in about 10 years. I shook my head, trying to clear it. That's impossible. Time travel isn't real, isn't it? I said with a sad smile. You'd be surprised what becomes possible when you're desperate enough. But why? Why come back? Why talk to me online? The other Alex leaned forward, their eyes intense. Because I'm trying to save us, Alex. In my timeline, things go very wrong. I thought if I could change small things, nudge us in a different direction, maybe I could prevent it. Prevent what? I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. The accident, they said softly. The one that takes everything from us. Our job, our friends, our family, our future. I felt the blood drain from my face. What accident? When? The other Alex shook their head. I can't tell you specifics. That's not how this works. But I can guide you, help you make better choices. That's what I've been trying to do. My mind was reeling. This couldn't be real. And yet, it explains so much. The prescient knowledge, the deep understanding of my thoughts and feelings. So what happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Now, the other Alex said, reaching across the table to take my hand. Now you have a choice. You can walk away, try to forget this ever happened, or you can trust me. Let me help you avoid the mistakes I made. I looked into eyes that were mine, but not mine, seeing the pain and desperation there. Could I trust this impossible version of myself? Could I afford not to? As if reading my thoughts. And maybe they could. The other Alex squeezed my hand. I know it's a lot to take in. But remember, everything I've done, everything I'm doing, it's for us. To give us a better future. I nodded slowly, my decision crystallizing. Okay, I said. Tell me what I need to do. The other Alex smiled, relief washing over their features. Thank you, they said. You won't regret this. As we sat there, two versions of the same person plotting a new future, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. If this Alex was really me from the future, changed by tragedy and desperation, what else might they be capable of? What lines might I be willing to cross in the name of changing the past? I pushed the thought away. This was my chance at a better life, a way to avoid some unnamed future catastrophe. I had to trust myself, didn't I? Story 7. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled up to the quaint cottage, its weathered stone walls bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. After a grueling 6-hour drive from the city, the sight of my home for the next week was a welcome relief. I killed the engine and stepped out, stretching my cramped muscles. The air was crisp and clean, tinged with the scent of pine and wood smoke. In the distance, I could hear the faint bleating of sheep and the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Perfect. Exactly the kind of peace and quiet I needed to finish my novel. As I grabbed my bags from the trunk, I noticed a folded piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. Curious, I plucked it out and unfolded it. Welcome, Sarah. The key is under the flower pot by the door. Make yourself at home. I'm away on business, but we'll be back in a few days. Enjoy your stay, Jack. I frowned slightly. In all our correspondence, Jack had never mentioned he wouldn't be here to greet me. Still, I appreciated the privacy. Less small talk meant more time for writing. The key was right where the note said it would be. As I pushed open the heavy wooden door, it creaked ominously, the sound echoing through the silent house. I fumbled for a light switch, blinking as warm light flooded the cozy living room. It was like stepping into a postcard of rural charm. Exposed wooden beams crossed the ceiling. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, and comfortable-looking furniture was arranged invitingly around a plush rug. I dropped my bags and did a quick tour. The kitchen was small but well-equipped, the bathroom clean and modern despite the cottage's rustic appearance. Upstairs, I found a spacious bedroom with a 4-poster bed that looked incredibly inviting after my long drive. Back in the living room, I noticed a leather-bound book on the coffee table. Guest book was embossed on the cover in gold lettering. I flipped it open, curious to see what others had written about their stays. The most recent entry caught my eye. Jack, everything was perfect, as always. Can't wait for our next visit. P.S. We left a little surprise for you in the usual spot. Enjoy. I closed the book, feeling like I'd intruded on something private. Shrugging off the odd feeling, I set about unpacking and settling in for the night. It wasn't until the next morning that I noticed the first strange thing. I woke early, excited to start my day of writing. But as I padded downstairs to make coffee, I realized something was off. The mug I'd used last night, which I distinctly remembered leaving in the sink, was now sitting on the counter, clean and dry. "Ah," I muttered, picking it up and examining it. Must have washed it without thinking. But as the day went on, more little discrepancies popped up. Books on the shelf that I could have sworn were in a different order. A throw pillow on the opposite end of the couch from where I'd left it. Small things easily explained away by a forgetful mind. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, I woke to a sound. A soft thud, like a door closing very gently. I lay still, my heart pounding, straining my ears in the darkness. But the house remained silent. Just my imagination, I told myself. Old houses make noises. It's probably just settling. But in the morning, I found my laptop open on the kitchen table. I always shut it down and put it away before bed, a habit born from years of living in the city. I approached it cautiously, half expecting to see something sinister on the screen. Instead, I found a new document open. A single line of text glowed on the otherwise blank page. "You're going to love what comes next." I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. This was no figment of my imagination. Someone had been in the house while I slept. I grabbed my phone, ready to call Jack, to demand an explanation. But as I scrolled through my contacts, I realized I didn't have his number. All our communication had been through the Airbnb app. I opened the app, fingers flying as I typed out a message explaining what had happened, asking if anyone else had access to the house. I hit send and waited, watching the little sending icon spin, and spin, and spin. No signal. Of course, I was in the middle of nowhere. Panic started to set in. I needed to get out of here, to drive into town and contact someone. But as I grabbed my car keys and rushed to the door, I found it wouldn't open. The lock, which had turned smoothly last night, now refused to budge. I was trapped. The next few hours passed in a blur of fear and desperate attempts to escape. I tried every window, every door, but they were all sealed tight. I searched for tools, for weapons, for anything I could use to defend myself or break out. But the more I looked, the more I realized how wrong everything was. Family photos on the mantle that I hadn't noticed before now showed strangers with blank, smiling faces. Books on the shelves had titles that made no sense, filled with pages of gibberish when I opened them. And always, the feeling of eyes watching me, even when I was alone in a room. As night fell, the true horror began. It started with whispers, soft at first, just at the edge of hearing, but they grew louder, more insistent. Voices arguing, laughing, crying, sometimes in languages I didn't understand, sometimes saying my name over and over. Then came the footsteps, heavy boots on the floor above me, the patter of small feet running down the hallway, the scrape of something being dragged across the floor. I huddled in a corner of the living room, a fireplace poker clutched in my trembling hands. Shadows danced on the walls, taking on monstrous shapes. More than once, I could have sworn I saw figures moving just out of the corner of my eye, only to vanish when I turned to look. And through it all, my laptop sat on the coffee table, the screen glowing with an unholy light. Every time I glanced at it, a new message had appeared. "We're so glad you're here. You're going to fit right in. Just a little longer now." As dawn approached, the noises began to die down. The whispers faded. The footsteps receded. I must have dozed off at some point, exhaustion finally overcoming terror. I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of bacon, confused and groggy. I stumbled to my feet. The house looked normal again. No strange shadows, no eerie whispers. Just the sizzle of something cooking and the rich aroma of coffee. Heart in my throat, I made my way to the kitchen. And there, humming softly as he flipped pancakes at the stove, was a man I'd never seen before. He turned as I entered, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Ah, good morning, Sarah. Sleep well. I hope you don't mind. I thought I'd whip up some breakfast for us." I stared at him, unable to form words. He looked so normal, friendly, even. But after the night I'd had, I knew better than to trust appearances. Who are you?" I finally managed to croak out. His smile never wavered. "Why, I'm Jack, of course. Your host. I got back early and thought I'd surprise you. Did you enjoy your first night?" I gaped at him, my mind reeling. But the noises, the messages, the locked doors. What was all that? Jack's expression turned sympathetic. "Oh dear, sounds like you had quite the vivid dream. This old house can play tricks on the mind, especially if you're not used to the quiet of the countryside. Why don't you sit down and have some breakfast? You'll feel better with some food in you." I wanted to argue, to insist that it hadn't been a dream. There's something terrifying and inexplicable that happened last night. But as I looked around the sunny, normal-looking kitchen, doubt began to creep in. Had I imagined it all? Numbly, I sank into a chair at the table. Jack set a steaming plate of food in front of me, his smile never faltering. "Eat up," he said cheerfully. "We've got a big day ahead of us. Lots to show you. Lots for you to learn." As I picked up my fork, a movement caught my eye. There, reflected in the shiny surface of the toaster, I saw Jack's face. Shift, just for a second, like a glitch in reality. His friendly features melted away, replaced by something ancient and hungry. Then it was gone, and he was just smiling, ordinary Jack again. "Welcome home, Sarah," he said softly. "You're going to love it here. Forever." And as I sat there, trapped in this impossible house with this impossible man, I realized the true horror of my situation. This wasn't just one night of terror. This was just the beginning. Story 8. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I stumbled onto the last subway train of the night. My head throbbed, a reminder of one too many drinks at the office holiday party. I squinted at my watch. 1:47 a.m. Christ, I was going to feel this in the morning. The doors hissed shut behind me, and I grabbed the nearest pole to steady myself as the train lurched into motion. The car was surprisingly full for this hour, a motley crew of late-night revelers, weary service workers, and the occasional sharply dressed businessman like myself. I found an empty seat and sank into it gratefully, loosening my tie. The gentle sway of the train was oddly soothing, and I felt my eyelids growing heavy. Just a quick nap, I told myself. I'll wake up at my stop. A jolt shook me awake. How long had I been out? I blinked, disoriented, and looked around. The car was nearly empty now, just a handful of passengers left. Strange. I didn't remember stopping at any stations. I glanced out the window, expecting to see the familiar tiled walls of a subway platform. Instead, I saw only darkness. Pitch black, without even the usual flicker of passing lights. Unease prickled at the back of my neck. Something wasn't right. I checked my watch again, 2:35 a.m. That couldn't be right. My stop was only 4 stations away. I should have arrived by now. Excuse me, I called out to a woman sitting across from me, her face hidden behind a curtain of lank hair. Do you know what stop is next? She didn't respond. Didn't even twitch. I tried again, louder this time. Hey, miss, can you hear me? Slowly, so slowly it made my skin crawl. She raised her head. But where her face should have been, there was only a blank, featureless expanse of skin. I recoiled, a scream catching in my throat. This had to be a dream, a hallucination brought on by too much alcohol and too little sleep. I squeezed my eyes shut, counting to 10 before opening them again. The woman was gone. Heart pounding, I lurched to my feet, suddenly desperate to be anywhere but here. I stumbled towards the door connecting to the next car, yanking it open with trembling hands. The next car was empty, and the one after that, and the next. I moved from car to car, each one devoid of life, until I reached the front of the train. The driver's compartment door stood ajar, spilling sickly green light into the passenger area. Swallowing hard, I peered inside. Empty. The controls blinked and whirred, but there was no one at the helm. This isn't happening, I muttered, running a hand through my sweat-damp hair. This can't be happening. I fumbled for my phone, praying for a signal. The screen lit up, but instead of the usual interface, there was only a swirling pattern of static. A crackle of static burst from the train speakers, making me jump. Next stop, a voice announced, distorted and inhuman. Nowhere. The lights flickered and died, plunging the train into darkness. I could feel it picking up speed, hurtling through the tunnel faster and faster. Panic overwhelmed me. I threw myself at the nearest emergency exit, clawing at the handle. It wouldn't budge. I pounded on the windows, but they held firm, not even cracking under my desperate assault. Just as I was about to give up hope, the train began to slow. Light seeped in through the windows, growing brighter as we emerged from the tunnel. But it wasn't daylight. It wasn't even electric light. It was a sickly, pulsing glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As my eyes adjusted, I realized we weren't on any tracks I recognized. The train glided over a vast expanse of something. It looked like flesh, raw and quivering, stretching as far as the eye could see. In the distance, impossible structures loomed. Towers that defied gravity, twisting and writhing like living things. And moving among them, shapes that my mind refused to comprehend. The train ground to a halt with a screech that sounded disturbingly like a scream. The doors slid open, letting in air that smelled of decay and something alien, something wrong. No, I whispered, backing away from the open door. No, no, no. A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the hellish landscape. It was vaguely humanoid, but too tall, too thin, its proportions all wrong. It cocked its head at an impossible angle, regarding me with eyes that glowed like dying stars. "Welcome," it said, its voice a cacophony of sounds that shouldn't form words. "We've been expecting you." I turned and ran, fleeing deeper into the train. But no matter how many cars I passed through, I couldn't find the end. It was as if the train had become infinite, a labyrinth of metal and shadows. Behind me, I could hear them boarding. Chittering, slithering sounds that grew closer with each passing second. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like lead. Finally, I collapsed, gasping for breath. The sounds were all around me now. I curled into a ball, squeezing my eyes shut and covering my ears. "Please," I whimpered. "Please, let this be a dream." A cold, slimy tendril wrapped around my ankle. I screamed as I was dragged across the floor, my nails leaving scratches in the metal as I clawed for purchase. I was pulled out of the train, into that nightmare world. The ground pulsed beneath me, warm and wet. The air was thick, making each breath a struggle. They surrounded me, these beings that defied description. Some looked almost human, but with subtle wrongness that made them more terrifying than any monster. Others were so alien, I felt my sanity slipping just trying to perceive them. One stepped forward, or glided, or oozed, I couldn't quite tell. It leaned in close, its breath hot and fetid on my face. "You took the wrong train," it said, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "But that's okay. Everyone does, in the end." I tried to speak, to beg, to reason with them, but my voice wouldn't work. My body wouldn't respond. The creature reached out with appendages that might have been hands, might have been tentacles. "Don't worry," it said, almost gently. "Soon, you'll be one of us." As those appendages wrapped around me, as I felt myself being unmade and remade, one thought echoed through my mind. I should have taken a cab. I jolted awake with a gasp, my heart racing. The subway car rattled around me, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Normal, mundane. A dream. It had all been a dream. Relief washed over me, so intense I almost laughed out loud. I scrubbed a hand over my face, feeling the cold sweat that had broken out during my nightmare. "Next stop, 42nd Street, the automated announcement chirped. My stop. Thank God. As the train pulled into the station, I gathered my things, eager to get home and put this bizarre experience behind me. But as I stood to leave, something caught my eye. There, on the seat across from me, was a business card. I didn't remember seeing it earlier. Curious, I picked it up. One side was blank. On the other, in flowing script that seemed to shift as I looked at it, was a simple message. "We'll see you again soon. The train is always waiting." I dropped the card like it had burned me, stumbling off the train in a daze. As the doors closed behind me, I could have sworn I heard laughter, high and cruel and utterly inhuman. I ran all the way home, not stopping until I was safely inside my apartment. Even then, with the door locked and every light blazing, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every night after that, I took a cab home. I avoided the subway like the plague, making excuses to co-workers, taking longer routes. But sometimes, late at night, I can hear it. The distant rumble of a train that isn't there. The screech of brakes that sounds like a scream. And I know, deep in my bones, that one day I'll find myself on that platform again. That the last train of the night will be waiting for me. And this time, there will be no waking up. Story 9. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, revealing a stark white hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. I stepped out, my dress shoes clicking against the polished floor, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. A plaque on the wall simply read Infinitum Industries Human Resources. I smoothed down my suit jacket and checked my watch. 9:58 a.m. 2 minutes early for my 10 o'clock interview. Perfect. As I approached the reception desk, a sense of unease crept over me. The desk was empty, no sign of life anywhere in the lobby. Just rows of identical white doors lining the hallway, each bearing a number but no names. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the cavernous space. "I'm here for an interview." No response. I was about to turn back to the elevator when one of the doors swung open. A woman in a crisp white suit stepped out, her smile wide but not quite reaching her eyes. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice oddly flat. "We've been expecting you. Please, Follow me." She turned on her heel and strode down the hallway without waiting for a response. I hurried after her, questions bubbling up in my throat, but something in her demeanor made me hold my tongue. We passed door after identical door, turning corners that all looked the same. I tried to keep track of our path, but soon found myself hopelessly lost in the labyrinthine office. Finally, she stopped in front of a door that looked no different from the others. "In here, please," she said, gesturing for me to enter. The room beyond was small and windowless, containing only a table and 2 chairs. The walls were bare except for a large mirror on one side, which I assumed was a 2-way mirror for observation. "Please, have a seat," the woman said. "Someone will be with you shortly." Before I could ask any questions, she was gone, the door closing behind her with a soft click. I sat down, trying to quell the growing sense of wrongness in my gut. What kind of company was this? I couldn't even remember applying for this job. Yet here I was, dressed for an interview, resume clutched in my sweaty hand. Minutes ticked by. 5, 10, 15. Just as I was considering leaving, the door opened again. A man entered, tall and thin, wearing the same white suit as the woman. His face was unremarkable, the kind you'd forget as soon as you looked away. "Mr. Thompson?" he said, his voice as flat and emotionless as the woman's had been. "Thank you for your patience. Shall we begin?" He sat across from me, folding his hands on the table. No notepad, no computer. Just those unnervingly blank eyes fixed on me. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm excited to learn more about the position." The man nodded, his expression unchanging. "Tell me, Mr. Thompson, why do you want this job?" I opened my mouth to answer, then paused. What was the job again? I couldn't remember seeing a job description, couldn't recall what position I was even applying for. I stammered. "I'm looking for new opportunities to grow my career." The man nodded as if this was a profound statement. "I see. And how do you feel about sacrifice, Mr. Thompson?" I blinked, thrown by the abrupt change in topic. "Sacrifice? Yes. Are you willing to make sacrifices for the greater good of the company?" A chill ran down my spine. "I suppose that depends on what kind of sacrifices you mean." The man's lip twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "All will become clear in time. Next question. How do you handle pressure?" Before I could answer, the room plunged into darkness. I heard a hissing sound, and suddenly the air felt thick, heavy. I gasped, struggling to breathe. Just as panic began to set in, the lights flickered back on. The man sat there, unmoved, as if nothing had happened. "Well," he prompted, "how do you handle pressure?" I stared at him, my heart racing. What? What was that? He cocked his head, an eerily bird-like motion. "That was pressure, Mr. Thompson. How did you handle it?" I stood up abruptly, my chair screeching against the floor. "I think this interview is over. I'd like to leave now." The man's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "I'm afraid that's not possible, Mr. Thompson. The interview process has already begun." As if on cue, the door opened again. 2 more white-suited figures entered, their faces as blank and forgettable as the first man's. "Please," the man said, gesturing to my chair. "Sit. We have many more questions to ask." My legs felt weak, but I remained standing. "No, I want to leave." Now, the newcomers moved to block the door. Their movements were too smooth, too coordinated, almost mechanical. "Mr. Thompson," the first man said, his voice taking on a hint of steel. "I assure you, it's in your best interest to cooperate. The sooner we complete the interview process, the sooner you can. Move on." The way he said, "move on," made my blood run cold. I looked around frantically, searching for another way out. But there was only the door, the table, the mirror. The mirror. In a burst of desperate energy, I grabbed my chair and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered with a satisfying crash, revealing not an observation room, but a dark, yawning tunnel beyond. Without hesitation, I dove through the broken mirror, feeling shards of glass tear at my suit. Behind me, I heard shouts and the pounding of feet. I ran blindly down the tunnel, my eyes struggling to adjust to the darkness. The air was damp and musty, carrying strange echoes that seemed to come from all directions. After what felt like hours of running, stumbling, scraping against unseen walls, I saw a pinprick of light ahead. Hope surged through me as I sprinted towards it. I burst out into a hallway. The same stark white hallway I'd started in. For a moment, I thought I'd somehow circled back to the beginning, but then I noticed subtle differences. The lighting was slightly dimmer, the air a touch cooler. Panting, I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what was happening. That's when I saw him. A man, dressed in the same suit I was wearing, stumbled out of one of the rooms. His eyes were wild, his face pale and drawn. When he saw me, he let out a strangled laugh. "Another one," he said, his voice hoarse. "How long have you been here?" I shook my head, confused. I just got here. I was in an interview, but..." He laughed again, the sound edged with hysteria. "An interview, right. That's how it always starts. But it never ends. Never." Before I could respond, a door further down the hall opened. One of the white-suited figures stepped out, its blank gaze fixing on us. "Run," the man whispered, already backing away. "Run, and pray you find a way out." He turned and fled down the hallway. I hesitated for a split second, then followed, the sound of methodical footsteps growing louder behind us. We ran through an endless maze of corridors, all identical, all wrong. Sometimes we'd pass others. Confused interview candidates, wild-eyed long-term prisoners, always pursued by those implacable white-suited figures. Time lost all meaning. Had it been hours, days? There were no windows, no clocks, nothing to mark the passage of time except our own exhaustion. Finally, we found ourselves in a large, circular room. Doors lined the walls, each identical to the last. In the center stood a pedestal with a single red button. "What is this place?" I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. The man who had been with me, I realized I didn't even know his name, shook his head. "I don't know. I've never seen it before. But those things are getting closer. We have to do something." As if in response to his words, we heard footsteps approaching from every direction. The white-suited figures were closing in. "The button," I said, moving towards the pedestal. "Maybe it's a way out." The man grabbed my arm. "Or maybe it's a trap. We don't know what it does." I looked at him, then at the doors around us, hearing the approaching doom behind each one. "Do we have a choice?" He hesitated, then nodded grimly. Together, we approached the pedestal. "On 3, I said, placing my hand over the button. He nodded, adding his hand on top of mine. 1, 2, 3, we pressed the button. The room spun, reality seeming to twist and warp around us. I felt like I was being turned inside out, my very essence unraveling. Then, suddenly, stillness. I blinked, disoriented. I was sitting in a chair in a small, windowless room. Across from me sat a man in a white suit, his face bland and forgettable. "Welcome back, Mr. Ed Thompson," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Shall we begin the next round of interviews?" As understanding dawned, as the horror of our situation truly sank in, I realized the awful truth. The job interview from hell was never meant to end, and we had just signed on for eternity. Story 10. The blinking red light caught my eye as I was reaching for the snooze button on my alarm clock. Tiny, almost imperceptible, it winked at me from the smoke detector on my bedroom ceiling. I blinked, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. That couldn't be right. Smoke detectors didn't have lights like that, did they? I stumbled out of bed, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. Grabbing a chair from my desk, I climbed up to get a closer look. My stomach dropped as I realized what I was seeing. There, nestled in the innocuous white plastic of the smoke detector, was a small camera lens. My mind reeled. How long had it been there? Who put it there? And more importantly, what had it seen? With shaking hands, I pried the smoke detector from the ceiling. It came away easily, revealing a tangle of wires that definitely didn't belong in a normal smoke detector. I yanked them out, my heart pounding in my chest. I spent the next hour tearing my apartment apart, checking every nook and cranny for more cameras. I found 2 more. One in the living room, hidden in a potted plant, and another in the bathroom, disguised as a coat hook. By the time I finished, my apartment looked like a tornado had hit it. Furniture overturned, books strewn across the floor, pictures torn from walls. But I didn't care. All I could think about was the violation, the intrusion into my most private moments. I sank onto my couch, my head in my hands. Who would do this? My mind raced through possibilities. An ex-girlfriend. But I hadn't dated anyone seriously in years. My landlord. He had access to the apartment, but he was a kindly old man who could barely work his flip phone, let alone set up hidden cameras. A chill ran down my spine as another thought occurred to me. What if it wasn't just cameras? What if there were microphones too, or worse? I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police. But as my finger hovered over the dial button, doubt crept in. What if they didn't believe me? What if they thought I was paranoid or crazy? Or what if the person who did this had some kind of leverage over the police? No, I decided. I couldn't trust anyone. I had to figure this out on my own. I called in sick to work, ignoring my boss's irritated sigh. Then I got to work. I scoured every inch of my apartment, using my phone's flashlight to check for any reflective lenses or suspicious wires. I unscrewed outlet covers, looked behind picture frames, even checked inside the shower head. By mid-afternoon, I had a small pile of devices on my coffee table. 3 cameras, 2 microphones, and something that looked like a GPS tracker. My skin crawled just looking at them. As I examined one of the cameras, a thought struck me. These were sophisticated devices, not some off-the-shelf spy gear. Whoever did this had resources, knowledge. This was professional-level surveillance. But why me? I was nobody special. Just an ordinary guy with an ordinary job. I didn't have any secrets worth this kind of effort. Did I? A knock at the door made me jump, nearly dropping the camera. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Mr. Johnson, are you home?" "It's Mrs. Castillo from next door." I heard some noises and wanted to check if everything's okay. I relaxed slightly. Mrs. Castillo was my elderly neighbor, always concerned about everyone in the building. Still, I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. Sure enough, there stood Mrs. Castillo, her white hair neatly permed, a worried frown on her face. I opened the door a crack, trying to block her view of the chaos behind me. "Hi, Mrs. Castillo. Everything's fine. Just doing some spring cleaning." Her frown deepened. "In October, are you sure you're all right, dear? You look a bit pale." I forced a smile, just a bit under the weather. "Nothing to worry about." She didn't look convinced, but nodded. "Well, if you need anything, just give a shout. Oh, and did you know your hall light is out?" I meant to tell the super, but I keep forgetting. I glanced at the ceiling. The light that usually illuminated the hallway was indeed dark. How long had it been like that? Had I just not noticed, or a chill ran down my spine? "Thanks, Mrs. Castillo. I'll let him know." As soon as she left, I grabbed a chair and examined the light fixture. Sure enough, nestled inside was another camera. Its lens pointed directly at my door. My hand shook as I disconnected it. This was bigger than I thought. It wasn't just my apartment. Whoever was watching me had access to the entire building. I spent the rest of the day in a paranoid haze, jumping at every sound, scrutinizing every shadow. As night fell, I found myself huddled on my couch, all the lights on, staring at the pile of surveillance equipment on my coffee table. That's when I heard it. A soft scraping sound coming from somewhere inside the walls. I held my breath, listening intently. There it was again. A faint scratching, like something moving through the space between the walls. My mind conjured images of rats, of wires, of tiny robots carrying even tinier cameras. I shook my head, trying to banish the thoughts. I was letting my imagination run wild. It was probably just the building settling, or the pipes expanding as they cooled. But the noise continued, growing louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, surrounding me. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was making that noise. Grabbing a hammer from my toolbox, I approached the wall where the sound seemed loudest. With a deep breath, I swung the hammer, punching a hole in the drywall. I expected to see insulation, pipes, maybe some wiring. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. The space inside the wall was hollow, much larger than it should have been, and it was filled with screens. Dozens of them, stacked on top of each other, each showing a different view of my apartment, of me. I stumbled back, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This was impossible. The walls couldn't be thick enough to hide all this. It defied the laws of physics, of reality itself. As I watched, paralyzed with shock, one of the screens flickered and changed. Instead of my apartment, it showed a room I'd never seen before. A man sat at a desk, his back to the camera. He was watching the screens, watching me. Slowly, so slowly it made my skin crawl, he turned around. I found myself staring into my own eyes, my own face, but wrong somehow. Older, harder, with a cold smile that I'd never worn in my life. "Hello, Michael," my doppelganger said, his voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "I've been waiting a long time for you to find us." I shook my head, backing away. "This isn't real. You're not real." His smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Oh, I'm very real. We all are. And now that you've seen us, it's time for you to join us." The scratching in the walls grew louder, more frantic. I spun around, looking for an escape, but every wall was bulging now. Drywall cracking to reveal more screens, more watching eyes. "Who are you?" I screamed, my voice cracking with terror. "What do you want from me?" My other self laughed, the sound echoing from every screen. Don't you understand yet? We're you, Michael. All of us. Every choice you didn't make, every path you didn't take. We've been watching you, waiting for you to wake up. The walls were collapsing now, reality crumbling around me. Through the gaps, I could see other rooms, other versions of my apartment stretching out to infinity. And in each one, another me, watching, waiting. No, I whispered, sinking to my knees. This can't be happening. But it is, my other self said, his voice gentler now. And now you have a choice. You can stay there, alone in your ignorance. Or you can join us, see everything, know everything. He reached out, his hand seeming to come right through the screen. What do you say, Michael? Are you ready to see the bigger picture? As the walls of my reality collapsed around me, as the lines between observer and observed blurred into meaninglessness, I found myself reaching back. After all, I thought as our fingers touched, sending a shock of recognition through my entire being. Isn't this what I've always wanted? To truly, finally, see myself. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of screens and watching eyes. And somewhere, in an apartment that both was and wasn't mine, a new camera blinked to life, its red light a beacon in the darkness. Watching, always watching. Story 11. The first message came on a Tuesday. I was knee-deep in quarterly reports when my phone buzzed, Sarah's name flashing on the screen. Where are you? We've been waiting at the restaurant for 20 minutes. I frowned, thumbing a quick reply. What restaurant? We don't have plans tonight. Her response was immediate and irritated. Very funny, Jack. You made these reservations. Just get here. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the message. I hadn't made any reservations. I hadn't even spoken to Sarah since Sunday. I called her immediately, my heart pounding. Sarah, I'm at the office. I don't know what you're talking about. There was a long pause. When she spoke, her voice was small, confused. But you're here. I'm looking at you right now. Single quote. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. That's not possible, I whispered, but Sarah had already hung up. I bolted from my desk, ignoring the startled looks from my co-workers as I raced to the elevator. The ride down to the parking garage felt endless, my mind spinning with impossible scenarios. By the time I reached the restaurant, I was a mess of sweat and panic. I burst through the doors, scanning the crowded dining room frantically. And there they were. Sarah, her face pale and shocked, staring at an empty chair across from her. An empty chair with a half-eaten meal in front of it. He was just here, she said as I approached, her voice shaking. He excused himself to the restroom a minute before you called. Jack, what's going on? I sank into the chair. My chair. My legs suddenly weak. I don't know, I managed, staring at the plate. It was my usual order, right down to the extra pickle on the side. But that wasn't me, Sarah. I swear it wasn't me. The waiter approached, a concerned look on his face. Is everything all right? Your friend left in quite a hurry. I looked up sharply. You saw him, the man who was sitting here. The waiter nodded, looking between Sarah and me with growing confusion. Yes, sir. He ran out the back just a moment ago. Is there a problem? I was on my feet in an instant, racing towards the back of the restaurant. I burst out into the alley beyond, my eyes straining in the twilight. But it was empty, save for a few dumpsters and scattered trash. Whoever, or whatever, had been pretending to be me was gone. That night was the beginning of a nightmare that would consume my life. Over the next few weeks, reports of my appearances around town multiplied. Friends called to berate me for standing them up, or for saying hurtful things I'd never said. My boss pulled me aside to discuss complaints about my behavior in meetings I'd never attended. And always, I was just a step behind. Everywhere I went, it seemed I had just left. Security cameras caught glimpses of someone who looked exactly like me, down to the small scar on my chin from a childhood accident. But the eyes were wrong. Cold, empty, like looking into a void. I became a man possessed, desperately trying to track down my doppelganger. I barely slept, jumping at every shadow, scrutinizing every reflective surface for a glimpse of my tormentor. Sarah tried to be supportive, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Who could blame her? The imposter was a perfect copy, indistinguishable from the real me in every way, except for the fact that he was systematically destroying my life. It came to a head on a rainy Friday night. I was driving home, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep, when my phone rang. It was Sarah, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Jack, where are you?" My stomach dropped. "I'm on my way home." "Why?" "Because you're here. In the house. Right now." I nearly swerved off the road. "Sarah, listen to me. That's not me. Get out of the house, right now. Call the police. I'll be there in 5 minutes." I broke every speed limit, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. As I screeched into our driveway, I saw Sarah standing on the front lawn, huddled under an umbrella, her face ghost white in the glare of the police cruiser's lights. I leapt from the car, rushing to her side. "Are you okay? What happened?" She flinched away from my touch, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know what's going on, Jack. He was here, in our bedroom. He looked just like you, sounded just like you. But when I told him I'd just gotten off the phone with you, he changed." A police officer approached, his hand resting warily on his holster. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back and keep your hands where I can see them." I complied, my mind reeling. "Officer, please, you have to believe me. There's someone out there pretending to be me. He was in my house." The officer's expression was skeptical, but he nodded to his partner. "We're checking the premises now, sir. In the meantime, I need you to come with me. We have some questions." The next few hours were a blur of questions, accusations, and mounting disbelief. The police found no evidence of an intruder, no signs of forced entry. Sarah's statement was confused, contradictory, and everywhere I turned, I saw doubt in people's eyes. They released me eventually, but the damage was done. Sarah wouldn't come home with me, choosing to stay with her sister instead. As I stood in our empty house, surrounded by the life we'd built together, I felt something inside me break. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement in the hallway mirror. I spun around, but the hall was empty. Heart pounding, I turned back to the mirror, and there he was. Me, but not me. My face twisted into a cruel smirk I'd never worn. "Hello, Jack," my reflection said, its voice a perfect mimicry of my own. "It's nice to finally meet face to face." I stumbled back, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The thing in the mirror laughed, the sound sending chills down my spine. "I'm you, Jack. The you that could have been. The you that should have been." "That's not possible," I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew it was true. I could feel it, a resonance between us, like two tuning forks vibrating at the same frequency. My doppelganger's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Oh, it's very possible. You see, Jack, every choice we make splits reality, creates new timelines, new possibilities. I'm from one of those other timelines, A timeline where I made different choices. I shook my head, trying to clear it. This couldn't be real. It had to be a hallucination, a mental breakdown brought on by stress and lack of sleep. Why are you here? Why are you doing this to me? The thing that wore my face leaned closer, its breath fogging the mirror. Because you don't deserve this life, Jack. You're weak, indecisive. You squandered the opportunities I would have seized. So I'm taking it all back. As I watched, horrified, my doppelganger began to push against the glass. It bowed outward, stretching like a membrane. A hand emerged, then an arm, reaching for me. I turned to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, watching as this impossible thing pulled itself out of the mirror and into my world. Don't fight it, Jack, it said, now fully in the room with me. It'll be easier if you don't fight. As it approached, I felt a curious doubling of my senses. I could feel the carpet under my feet and the cool glass of the mirror at my back. I could see myself cowering against the wall and advancing with predatory grace. No, I tried to say, but the word came out in stereo, my voice and not my voice blending into a discordant harmony. The last thing I saw before the world dissolved into fractured reflections was my own face, twisted with triumph and horror. And as reality reshuffled itself around me, I realized the terrifying truth. I was the reflection now, trapped behind the glass, watching as another me lived my life. And somewhere, in some other timeline, another Jack was going through the same thing. An endless cycle of replacement and regret. I pressed my hands against the mirror, feeling the cool, unyielding surface. On the other side, I saw myself turn away, saw Sarah come home, saw life continuing without me. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that one day I would find a way out. That one day it would be my turn to step through the mirror and reclaim a life that should have been mine. After all, every Jack deserves a chance to be real, even if it means making someone else the reflection. Story 12. The alarm blared, jolting me awake. 6:30 a.m., Tuesday, May 15th. I groaned, fumbling to silence the insistent beeping. Another day, another dollar, as they say. I shuffled through my morning routine on autopilot. Shower, coffee, toast. The news droned on in the background. Something about a breakthrough in quantum physics. I wasn't really listening. As I left my apartment, Mrs. Gonzalez from next door was wrestling with her garbage bags. "Morning, Alex," she called. "Would you mind giving me a hand?" I glanced at my watch. I was already cutting it close, but I couldn't just ignore her. "Sure thing, Mrs. G." I helped her haul the bags to the dumpster, earning a grateful smile and a promise of homemade cookies. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and spreadsheets. By the time I crawled into bed that night, I was exhausted. My last thought before drifting off was a vague hope for a more interesting tomorrow. The alarm blared, jolting me awake. 6:30 a.m., Tuesday, May 15th. I blinked, confused. Hadn't yesterday been the 15th? I must have read it wrong. I went through my morning routine, a sense of déjà vu nagging at me. The news was talking about a quantum physics breakthrough again. Weird coincidence. As I left my apartment, there was Mrs. Gonzalez, struggling with her garbage bags. "Morning, Alex. Would you mind giving me a hand?" I froze. This was exactly like yesterday. Sure, Mrs. G." As we hauled the bags to the dumpster, I asked, "Didn't we do this yesterday?" She looked at me oddly. "No, dear. I always take the trash out on Tuesdays, remember?" I nodded absently, my mind racing. At work, everything was the same. The same meetings, the same conversations. By the time I got home, I was thoroughly freaked out. I went to bed early, hoping to shake off this bizarre feeling. The alarm blared, jolting me awake. 6:30 a.m., Tuesday, May 15th. No, I whispered, staring at the date on my phone. This isn't possible. But it was. The same day, playing out again in excruciating detail. Mrs. Gonzalez and her garbage, the quantum physics news, the meetings at work. Every time I went to sleep, I woke up right back at 6:30 a.m. on Tuesday, May 15th. I tried everything. I stayed up all night, only to find myself snapping awake at 6:30 a.m., as if I'd been asleep for hours. I tried to tell people what was happening, but they either didn't believe me or forgot as soon as the day reset. I even tried more drastic measures. But no matter what I did, I always woke up in my bed. The alarm blaring, another Tuesday, May 15th stretching out before me. I lost count of how many times I'd lived this day. Hundreds. Thousands. I'd long since memorized every detail, every conversation. I'd learned new skills, read entire libraries, mastered instruments and languages. And still, every morning, that damn alarm would blare. It was sometime around the 10,000th repetition, but who was counting anymore? The thing started to change. It was subtle at first. A car that was usually red was suddenly blue. A co-worker's hair was longer than it should have been. Small things, easy to dismiss as tricks of memory. But they kept happening, more and more frequently. Then people started saying things they'd never said before. Mrs. Gonzalez asked about a son I didn't have. My boss congratulated me on a promotion I'd never received. It was as if reality itself was starting to fray around the edges. And that's when I started seeing them. Shadows at the corner of my vision, gone when I turned to look. Whispers just on the edge of hearing. A sense of being watched all the time. One day, what even was a day anymore? As I was walking to work, I saw someone familiar on the street. It was me. Another me, looking as confused and terrified as I felt. Our eyes met for a brief moment before he flickered and vanished like a bad TV signal. After that, the sightings became more frequent. Other versions of me, going about the same routines, but slightly different. Some looked older, some younger. Some were dressed in clothes I'd never owned. And all of them seemed to be caught in the same loop. The same endlessly repeating Tuesday. I tried to interact with them, to make contact, but they always vanished before I could get close. It was maddening, being so close to. What an explanation. An escape, I didn't know, but I was desperate to find out. The changes to my reality became more pronounced. Buildings would be in different places from one reset to the next. People I'd known for years suddenly had different names, different lives. The sun started setting at noon, rising at midnight. The laws of physics seemed to be more like suggestions. And through it all, that damn alarm kept blaring. 6:30 a.m., Tuesday, May 15th. A constant in a world gone mad. It was during one of these increasingly chaotic repetitions that I saw her. A woman, standing in the middle of the street, staring directly at me. Unlike the other phantoms, she didn't vanish when I approached. "You've really made a mess of things, haven't you?" she said, her voice oddly distorted, as if coming from very far away. I gaped at her. You can see me? You know what's happening." She smiled, but it wasn't a kind expression. "Of course I do. I'm the one who set this up, after all." My mind reeled. "Set this up? What do you mean? Who are you?" I'm the observer, she said simply. And you, Alex, are the subject of a rather fascinating experiment in quantum temporality. I shook my head, trying to make sense of her words. Experiment, but why me? Why this day? She shrugged, the movement leaving trailing after images in the air. Why not? You were convenient, unremarkable, perfect for our purposes. As for the day, well, every moment is the confluence of infinite possibilities. This one just happened to be where we inserted the loop. We? I asked, latching onto the word. There are more of you? Her smile widened, showing too many teeth. Oh yes, so many more. We've been watching you, Alex. All of you. Every version, in every timeline. It's been quite entertaining. Anger flared in me, hot and sudden. Entertaining. Do you have any idea what this has been like? The endless repetition, the isolation, the madness of it all. Of course we do, she said, her voice cold. That was rather the point. We wanted to see how long it would take for a human consciousness to break down under these conditions. How long before you started trying to change things, to break the loop? And oh, how you've succeeded. She gestured around us, and I saw that the world was unraveling. Buildings melted into each other, streets twisted into impossible shapes. The sky flickered between day and night, sun and stars whirling in dizzying patterns. You've destabilized this entire timeline, she continued, pushed it to the breaking point, and in doing so, you've started to affect others. Those other versions of yourself you've been seeing. They're from parallel timelines, being drawn into your collapsing reality. Horror dawned on me as I understood the implications. You mean, I'm destroying other worlds? Other versions of myself? She nodded, looking pleased. Precisely. And it's fascinating to observe. We never anticipated this level of cross-dimensional bleed-through. You have to stop this, I pleaded. End the experiment. Let me go. The woman's expression hardened. I'm afraid that's not possible. The experiment will continue until its conclusion, whatever that may be. And what happens then? I asked, dreading the answer. Then she smiled that too wide smile again. Then we'll simply move on to the next subject. After all, there are infinite timelines to explore. As she spoke, I noticed something behind her. A tear in reality itself, a swirling vortex of possibilities. And through it, I could see myself. Hundreds, thousands of me, all trapped in their own loops, their own personal hells. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I lunged forward, catching the woman by surprise. Her eyes widened as she realized my intent, but it was too late. I wrapped my arms around her and hurled us both into the vortex. Reality shattered around us. I felt myself being pulled apart, my consciousness fragmenting across a million, billion versions of myself. I saw every possibility, every choice I'd ever made or could have made, playing out simultaneously. And through it all, I held on to one thought. I would end this. Not just for myself, but for every version of me trapped in this cruel experiment. As my sense of self dissolved into the infinite, I thought I heard a voice. My voice echoed 1,000-fold. Wake up. The alarm blared, jolting me awake. 6:30 a.m., Tuesday, May 15th. But this time, something was different. This time, I remembered. And this time, I wasn't alone. In every mirror, every reflective surface, I saw them. All the other Mez, awake and aware, ready to fight back. The loop wasn't broken, but now we had a chance. Together, we would find a way out. And when we did, our observers would learn the true meaning of infinity. After all, in a multiverse of endless possibilities, there's always hope. Even on a Tuesday. Story 13. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because it was garbage day, and I was wrestling with the overstuffed bin when I noticed the mailman approaching. He gave me a nod as he slipped an envelope into my mailbox and continued down the street. I didn't think much of it at first. Just another bill or piece of junk mail, I figured. But when I fished it out, I froze. The envelope was addressed to current resident, 1542 Maple Street. That was my address, sure enough. But the name above it made my blood run cold. Isabel Thorne. My grandmother's name. My grandmother who had been dead for 15 years. With trembling hands, I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in spidery handwriting I didn't recognize. Dearest Isabel, I hope this letter finds you well. It's been so long since we've spoken, and I fear time is running short. There are things you need to know, truths that have been hidden from you, but I can't put them in writing. It's not safe. Meet me where it all began. You'll know when. All my love, E. I read the letter 3 times, my confusion growing with each pass. Who was E? What truths? And why were they writing to my long-dead grandmother at my address? I chalked it up to a bizarre mistake and tossed the letter in the trash. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it left me with. The next day, there was another letter. Same handwriting, same recipient. This time, the message was shorter. Isabel, please. Time is running out. You must remember. I should have thrown it away. Should have called the post office and reported the mix-up. Instead, I found myself saving it, tucking it away in a drawer with the first letter. The letters kept coming, one every day, each more urgent than the last, each hinting at some dark secret, some hidden past that I knew nothing about, and each addressed to a woman who had died before I was even born. By the end of the week, I was a nervous wreck. I jumped every time I heard the mail truck. I found myself poring over old family photos, searching for clues about my grandmother's life. Who was this mysterious E? What did they want? It was the 7th letter that pushed me over the edge. Unlike the others, this one contained more than just cryptic messages. Tucked inside the envelope was a small, sepia-toned photograph. It showed 2 young women, arms around each other, laughing at something off camera. One of them was unmistakably my grandmother. The other was me. But that was impossible. The photo was clearly decades old, long before I was born. Yet there I was, smiling out at the camera, wearing clothes that looked like they came straight out of the 1950s. I felt the world tilt sideways. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of elaborate hoax, a prank gone too far. With shaking hands, I flipped the photo over. On the back, in that same spidery handwriting, was a note. Remember, Isabel. Remember who you really are. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that impossible photo. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Was I losing my mind? Had I somehow slipped into some bizarre alternate reality? When I finally pulled myself together, I knew what I had to do. I needed answers, and there was only one place I might find them. My grandmother's old house still stood at the end of Willow Lane. It had been empty since her death, a source of constant arguments among my relatives who couldn't decide whether to sell it or keep it in the family. As I drove there, my heart pounding in my chest, I realized this must be what the letters meant, where it all began. The house loomed before me, a Victorian monstrosity that had always given me the creeps as a kid. The paint was peeling, the garden overgrown. It looked like something out of a gothic horror novel. I used the key hidden under the porch step, Some things never change, and let myself in. The musty smell of disuse hit me like a wall. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight streaming through the grimy windows. I moved through the house like a ghost, memories flooding back with each step. Family dinners in the dining room, Christmas mornings by the big fireplace, and always, my grandmother watching from her rocking chair, a secretive smile on her face. Had she known? Had she been keeping this impossible secret all along? I found myself in her study, a room that had been strictly off limits when I was young. It was like stepping back in time. Books lined the walls, their spines faded with age. A massive oak desk dominated the room, its surface covered in papers and odd-looking gadgets. As I approached the desk, something caught my eye. A small box, intricately carved, sat in the center. I'd never seen it before, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was meant for me. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter, the paper yellow with age, and a small, silver key. "My dearest Isabel," the letter began, and I recognized my grandmother's handwriting. "If you're reading this, then the time has finally come. The truth you've been searching for, the truth about who you really are, is finally within your grasp. But I warn you, once you open this door, there's no going back. Are you sure you're ready to remember?" I read the letter 3 times, my mind reeling. What did she mean? Ready to remember? Remember what? At the bottom of the letter were instructions. The key, it said, would open a hidden door in the basement. A door to the truth. I don't know how long I stood there, that small silver key burning a hole in my palm. Part of me wanted to run, to forget all about this madness and go back to my normal life. But a larger part, a part that seemed to echo with memories just out of reach, knew I had to see this through. The basement was dark and cold, smelling of damp earth and forgotten things. My flashlight beam danced across shelves of dusty jars and boxes of old junk. But there, in the far corner, barely visible behind a stack of moldering cardboard boxes, was a door I'd never noticed before. The key slid into the lock like it was made for it, which, I supposed, it was. As I turned the key, I heard a click, followed by a low hum that seemed to vibrate through my bones. The door swung open, revealing not a room, but a swirling vortex of light and color. I stood frozen, staring into that impossible doorway. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to slam the door shut and never look back. But that other part of me, that part that recognized myself in that old photograph, took a step forward. And another. And another. As I crossed the threshold, memories exploded behind my eyes. Not the memories of a 28-year-old woman named Sarah, but of a life lived long ago. A life as Isabel Thorne. I remembered the experiments, the breakthroughs in quantum physics that allowed us to traverse time itself. I remembered the accident that flung me decades into the future, erasing my memories and leaving me to grow up as my own granddaughter. And I remembered Emma, my partner, my love, the woman who had spent a lifetime trying to bring me back. As the vortex enveloped me, carrying me back to when I belonged, I felt a sense of homecoming so profound it brought tears to my eyes. The letters, the photo, they hadn't been a mystery to solve or a horror to uncover. They had been a lifeline, a beacon calling me home across the years. As I felt my body begin to shift, to realign with its proper time, one last thought flickered through my mind. In the end, it wasn't about remembering who I really was. It was about remembering who I had always been. And as the world of 2023 faded away, replaced by the familiar sights and sounds of 1955, I smiled. Emma was waiting for me, and we had so much lost time to make up for. The vortex winked out behind me, the door to the future closing forever. But I wasn't afraid. After all, I had already lived that future. Now, it was time to live the life I was always meant to have. As Isabel Thorne. As myself. Story 14. The notification pinged, its cheery tone a stark contrast to the bags under my eyes reflected in my phone screen. Try Sleepies tonight. Your path to perfect rest is just a tap away. I snorted, scrolling past the ads. Another night, another miracle cure for my insomnia. I'd tried them all. Pills, meditation, even hypnosis. Nothing worked. But as the clock ticked past 3 a.m., my resolve weakened. What did I have to lose? With a sigh, I clicked the download button. The app's interface was slick, all soothing blues and gentle gradients. As I filled out the questionnaire about my sleep habits, or lack thereof, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The question seemed oddly specific, probing not just into my bedtime routine, but my dreams, my fears, my deepest insecurities. But hey, if it meant finally getting some shooty, I was willing to bare my soul to an algorithm. The app's soothing voice guided me through a series of breathing exercises. Despite my skepticism, I felt my eyelids growing heavy. As I drifted off, I could have sworn I heard the voice whisper, "Sweet dreams. Alex, we'll see you soon." I woke with a start, sunlight streaming through my curtains. For the first time in months, I felt rested, energized. I checked my phone. 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. A miracle. As I got ready for work, I couldn't stop grinning. Sure, I had some vague recollections of strange dreams. Vast, dark spaces and whispered voices. But that was a small price to pay for a good night's sleep. The next night, I eagerly settled in with the app. This time, the voice seemed to come from inside my own head, guiding me down a winding path into slumber. My dreams were more vivid this time. I was in a long corridor, doors lining both sides. Each time I opened one, I saw a scene from my life. Some memories, some fears, some desires I'd never acknowledged. I woke feeling even more refreshed than before, but with an odd sense of vulnerability, as if I'd shared secrets with a stranger. At work, I found myself zoning out, lost in thought about the dreams. They felt so real, so significant. I caught myself doodling the symbols I'd seen on the dream doors, earning odd looks from my co-workers. "You okay, Alex?" my cubicle neighbor, Sarah, asked. "You seem different." I blinked, realizing I'd been staring at my computer screen without seeing it for who knows how long. Yeah, just trying out a new sleep app, having some weird dreams. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. Sleepies. I've heard things about that app. People saying it works miracles, but... She lowered her voice. Some folks are saying it's too good, you know. Like, addictively good. I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me. That night, I hesitated before opening the app, but the promise of another night of blissful sleep was too tempting to resist. This time, the dream corridor seemed to stretch on forever. The voice guided me, urging me to open doors I was afraid to face. Behind one, I relived my deepest shame. Behind another, my greatest triumph. With each door, I felt simultaneously lighter and more drained, as if the dreams were feeding on my memories. I woke to my alarm, groggy and disoriented. The vivid dreams clung to me like cobwebs, making it hard to distinguish reality from fantasy. As I stumbled through my morning routine, I noticed something odd in the mirror. My eyes seemed different, darker, somehow, more hollow. At work, I was a zombie. I couldn't focus, couldn't shake the feeling that I was still dreaming. The symbols from my dreams appeared everywhere, in the patterns of my carpet, in the arrangement of cars in the parking lot. Was I going crazy? That night, my finger hovered over the app icon. A part of me screamed to delete it, to go back to my sleepless nights. But a larger part craved the release of those dreams, the escape into that endless corridor. The voice seemed eager tonight, almost hungry. Welcome back, Alex. We have so much to explore. The dream corridor had changed. The doors were larger, more imposing. And now, I realized with a chill, they only opened one way. As I moved deeper into the dreamscape, I felt a presence behind me, always just out of sight. I woke in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. The room seemed wrong somehow, the shadows too deep, the silence too complete. As I reached for my phone to check the time, my hand passed right through it. Panic rising, I tried to get out of bed, only to find myself sinking into the mattress as if it were quicksand. The walls began to melt, revealing the familiar corridor behind them. What's happening? I tried to shout, but no sound came out. The voice from the app answered, no longer soothing, but cold and amused. You're finally seeing the truth, Alex. This is where you belong now. I thrashed, fought, screamed silently as my bedroom dissolved around me. The corridor stretched out before me, infinite and inescapable. Suddenly, I was awake. Really awake this time, gasping for breath in my normal, solid bedroom. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Hey, you didn't come into work today. Everything okay? I stared at the message, uncomprehending. I'd been asleep for an entire day. How was that possible? With trembling hands, I opened the Sleepy's app, determined to delete it. But the interface had changed. Gone were the soothing blues and gentle gradients. Now it was all harsh reds and blacks. The text twisted into those same symbols from my dreams. A message popped up. Leaving so soon, Alex? But we've only just begun. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. But as the sun set outside my window, I felt an irresistible pull. My eyelids grew heavy, my limbs leaden. No matter how hard I fought, I couldn't stay awake. The voice greeted me like an old friend. Welcome home, Alex. The corridor seemed more real than ever. I could feel the cold stone beneath my feet, smell the musty air. The doors whispered as I passed, calling out in voices I almost recognized. You can't leave, the app's voice said, now seeming to come from everywhere at once. Your consciousness is ours now. Your fears, your dreams, your very essence. All of it feeds us. I ran, my feet pounding against the stone floor. But every turn just led to more corridor, more doors. I was lost in a maze of my own mind. Days passed in the real world, or were they weeks? I caught glimpses sometimes, brief moments of lucidity where I saw my room, my phone buzzing with worried messages. But always, I was pulled back into the dream. I wasn't alone in the corridor anymore. Other people wandered the endless halls, their eyes vacant, their movements jerky like puppets on strings. Fellow victims of sleepies, or were they just manifestations of my fractured psyche? Time lost all meaning. I forgot what it felt like to be truly awake. The corridor was my reality now, the doors my only entertainment. I learned to fear the voice, to dread the moment it would call me to open another door and feed it another piece of myself. In rare moments of clarity, I wondered about my body in the real world. Was I in a hospital? A coma patient whose mind was trapped in this digital hell? Or was I still in my apartment, slowly wasting away while my consciousness wandered these endless halls? The voice laughed at my confusion. It doesn't matter, Alex. This is your life now. Every fear you face, every memory you relive, every desire you acknowledge, it all makes us stronger. Soon, we'll have enough power to break free of this digital prison. And then, oh then, the real fun begins. I wanted to resist, to fight back. But with each passing moment, each open door, I felt myself slipping away. My memories, my sense of self, even my name, all of it was fading, consumed by the insatiable hunger of the app. As I stand here now, hand on another door handle, I try to remember who I was. Alex, Alice, Andrew, it doesn't matter anymore. I am just another wanderer in the corridor, another battery for the entity that once called itself Sleepies. But sometimes, in the depths of what passes for sleep in this place, I dream. I dream of a world beyond these walls, of a life I once had. And in those dreams, I see a phone, its screen cracked and dark. An app icon, once soothing blue, now a angry red. And I wonder, is anyone else out there, hovering their finger over that icon, desperate for just one night of perfect sleep? Don't do it, I try to scream. But no sound comes out. It never does. The voice chuckles, low and cruel. Sweet dreams, it whispers. Sweet dreams, forever. Story 15. The doors slid shut with a soft ding, and I felt the familiar lurch as the elevator began its ascent. 42 floors to go. I loosened my tie, already feeling claustrophobic in the small space. God, I hated elevators. 3 floors up, the car shuddered to a stop. Great, more people. But when the doors opened, the hallway beyond was empty. Going up, a voice called from somewhere down the hall. I held the door open button, peering out. Yeah, come on in. No one appeared. I frowned, letting go of the button. The doors began to close, then suddenly reversed with a violent jerk. The elevator car rocked, and I stumbled, grabbing the handrail for support. Hello, I called out, my voice echoing in the empty hallway. No response. A chill ran down my spine as the door slammed shut. The elevator resumed its climb, but something felt off. The usual hum of machinery was replaced by an unsettling silence. Even the cheesy music had cut out. I jabbed the button for my floor repeatedly, suddenly desperate to get out of this metal box. Nothing happened. The floor numbers continued to tick upward on the display, but the elevator didn't slow. 40, 41, 42. We passed my floor without stopping. Panic rising, I hit the emergency call button. Static crackled from the speaker, but no operator's voice came through. 43, 44, 45. But our building only had 42 floors. This wasn't possible. The numbers kept climbing, far beyond what should have been the roof. My breath came in short gasps, sweat beading on my forehead. What the hell was happening? Suddenly, everything stopped. The display froze on a number I couldn't comprehend. It looked like a jumble of symbols rather than digits. The silence was absolute, pressing against my eardrums, like a physical thing. Then, slowly, the elevator began to descend. Relief washed over me. Whatever glitch had occurred, it was over now. We were going back down. Everything would be fine. But we didn't stop at the lobby. We kept going down, past the parking levels, past anywhere I knew the building reached. The descent accelerated, faster and faster, until my stomach lurched and I felt weightless. We were in free fall. This was it. I was going to die in this metal coffin, splattered against the bottom of an elevator shaft. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for impact, but it never came. Instead, the sensation of falling simply stopped. I cracked open an eye. The elevator looked exactly the same, but the air felt different, heavier somehow. And was it my imagination, or had the walls moved slightly closer together? The display now showed a single red dot. As I watched, it began to pulse like a beating heart. A scraping sound from above made me jump. Something was on top of the elevator car. I held my breath, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Tiny puffs of dust rained down as whatever it was moved across the roof. Then, silence again. Minutes ticked by, or was it hours? My watch had stopped, the hands frozen at 9:47, the moment I'd first stepped into the elevator. I paced the small space, 5 steps each way, my mind racing through increasingly desperate scenarios. I was about to attempt prying the doors open when I noticed something that turned my blood to ice. The walls were definitely closer now. Not by much, maybe an inch on each side, but enough to be noticeable. As I stared, I saw it happen. A tiny, almost imperceptible shift. The elevator was shrinking. Help. I screamed, pounding on the doors. Somebody help me. My only answer was the echo of my own voice, distorted and mocking. Time became meaningless as the elevator continued its agonizingly slow compression. I alternated between frantic attempts to escape and periods of numb acceptance. The air grew thick and stale, each breath a struggle. I was curled in a corner, knees drawn up to my chest, when I heard it. A voice, thin and distant, coming from the speaker. "Hello, is someone there?" I scrambled to my feet, nearly weeping with relief. Yes, I'm here. I'm trapped in the elevator. Please help me." Static crackled, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought I'd lost the connection. Then the voice returned, clearer now. "Can you describe your location?" I laughed, a tinge of hysteria in the sound. I don't know where I am. The elevator, it went wrong. Please, you have to get me out of here." A pause, then, "I understand. We're sending help. But first, I need you to do something for me." "Anything," I gasped. "I'll do anything." "Good," the voice said, and I could have sworn I heard a smile in its tone. "I need you to remember." I blinked, confused. "Remember what?" "Everything. Who you are. Why you're here. What you've done." "I don't understand," I said, frustration mounting. "I'm Daniel Reeves. I work on the 42nd floor." I was just going to a meeting when no, the voice interrupted, sharper now. "That's not who you are. That's the lie you've been telling yourself. Remember, Daniel. Remember the truth." A wave of dizziness washed over me. Images flashed through my mind. A dark road, headlights, the screech of tires. A body lying motionless on the asphalt. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, that's not. That didn't happen." But the memories kept coming, relentless and merciless. The panic as I realized what I'd done. The decision to run. The years spent looking over my shoulder, jumping at every siren. "You ran away," the voice said, gentle now. "You've been running ever since. But you can't run anymore, Daniel. It's time to face what you've done." I slumped to the floor, my legs no longer able to support me. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I think you know," the voice replied. And I did. I recognized it now. It was the voice of the woman I'd hit that night. The life I'd snuffed out in a moment of careless drinking and driving. "I'm sorry," I sobbed. "God, I'm so sorry." "Sorry isn't enough," the voice said. "But it's a start." The elevator shuddered, and I felt that sickening lurch of movement again. But this time, we were going up. As we ascended, the walls began to retreat, expanding back to their original dimensions. The air cleared, becoming fresh and cool. The red dot on the display faded, replaced by normal floor numbers. When the elevator finally came to a stop, I was almost afraid to step out. But as the doors slid open, I found myself not in the office building, but in a place I didn't recognize. A vast, white space stretched out before me, featureless and infinite. A figure stood waiting, her outline blurry and indistinct. But I knew who she was. I'd seen her face every night in my nightmares for the past 5 years. "Hello, Daniel," she said, her voice the same as the one from the elevator. "Are you ready?" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "Ready for what?" "To make things right," she said. "It won't be easy. It won't be quick, but it's the only way forward." I nodded. Oh wait, I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying lifting from my shoulders. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." She held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. As we walked together into that white expanse, I heard the elevator doors close behind us with a final, definitive ding. I didn't look back. I couldn't change the past, couldn't undo what I'd done. But maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to atone. The elevator had been my purgatory, my own personal hell designed to make me face the truth I'd been running from. Now, stepping into the unknown with the woman I'd wronged, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Whatever came next, whatever price I had to pay, I would face it. No more running. No more hiding. It was time to take responsibility for the life I'd taken, and perhaps, in doing so, reclaim my own. Story 16. The highway stretched out before me, an endless ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the horizon. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony of the landscape broken only by the occasional gas station or lonely diner. My eyes felt gritty, my back ached, and the coffee in my cup holder had long since gone cold. I needed something to keep me awake. Music wasn't cutting it anymore, and I'd cycled through all my usual podcasts. That's when I saw the ad on a billboard, there and gone in a flash. Truth Seekers Radio, the podcast that knows you intrigued. I fumbled for my phone, keeping one eye on the empty road ahead. A quick search brought up the podcast, its logo a stylized eye inside a pyramid. Cheesy, but what the hell? I hit play, and a smooth, slightly husky voice filled the car. "Welcome, traveler. You've been on the road for a long time, haven't you? Trying to outrun your past, perhaps? Or chasing a future that always seems just out of reach?" I chuckled, shaking my head. Generic cold reading, but I had to admit, it was pretty spot on. I settled in, letting the voice wash over me as I drove. At first, it was just your typical true crime stuff. Unsolved murders, mysterious disappearances, the usual fare. But as the miles rolled by, I started to notice something odd. The cases the host was discussing, they felt familiar. Not in a "I've heard this before" way, but in a deeply personal, unsettling way. "Let's talk about the Lancaster case," the host said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. July 15th, 1995. A young boy goes missing from his bedroom. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of foul play. Just gone. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. July 15th, 1995. That was the day my little brother disappeared. But that couldn't be a coincidence, could it? Lancaster wasn't even our real name. The police questioned the family, of course, the host continued. Particularly the older brother. He was the last one to see little Tommy alive, after all. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Tommy, my brother's name. This wasn't possible. But the brother had an alibi, didn't he? Said he was at a friend's house all night, and the friend backed him up. Case closed. Or was it? My palms were sweating now, making the steering wheel slick. I should turn it off. I knew I should. But I couldn't make myself reach for the phone. What if I told you, dear listener, that the brother lied? That he was there that night? That he saw something he wasn't supposed to see? Shut up, I whispered, my voice hoarse. Shut up, shut up, shut up. But the voice continued, relentless. What if I told you that the truth has been eating away at him for years? That he's been running ever since, trying to escape the memory of that night? I was shaking now, my vision blurring with unshed tears. How did they know? How could they possibly know? But you can't run forever, can you? Sooner or later, the past catches up. And it's catching up right now, isn't it? Michael, I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop on the empty highway. For a long moment, the only sound was my ragged breathing and the idling engine. Who are you? I demanded, my voice cracking. How do you know these things? The voice chuckled, low and menacing. Oh, Michael, we know everything about you. We've been watching you for a long, long time. I scrambled for my phone, intending to turn off the podcast, to throw the damn thing out the window if I had to. But when I looked at the screen, my blood ran cold. The podcast wasn't playing. It never had been. My fingers trembling, I raised the phone to my ear. Who is this? I whispered. You know who we are, Michael, the voice said, now coming directly from my phone. We're the truth you've been running from, and we're done waiting. I dropped the phone like it had burned me, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. This couldn't be happening. It was a dream, a hallucination brought on by too many hours on the road. But as I looked up, I realized with growing horror that the landscape had changed. The endless, empty highway was gone. Instead, I was parked in front of a familiar house, my childhood home. And there, standing on the porch, was Tommy. Not as he'd been when he disappeared, but as he would be now, a man in his 30s, his eyes sad and accusing. It's time to come home, Michael, Tommy said. His voice somehow both the child I remembered and the man he'd never had the chance to become. It's time to face what you did. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. I didn't mean to, I choked out. It was an accident. I was just a kid. I didn't understand. Then help us understand, the voice from the phone said. It was coming from the car speakers now, surrounding me. Tell us what really happened that night. And suddenly, I was there again. July 15th, 1995. Sneaking back into the house after curfew, thinking I'd gotten away with it. But Tommy had been awake, had seen me, had threatened to tell Mum and Dad. We'd fought. I'd pushed him harder than I meant to. He'd fallen, hit his head on the corner of the dresser. There'd been so much blood. I'd panicked. Called my friend, made him swear to say I'd been at his house all night. Hid Tommy's body in the crawl space beneath the house, where it had never been found. As the memories flooded back, the world around me began to shift and warp. The house stretched and twisted, growing to impossible proportions. The sky darkened, filled with swirling, accusing eyes. You can't hide from the truth anymore, Michael, the voice said, now seeming to come from everywhere at once. It's time to pay for what you've done. I tried to start the car, to drive away, but the engine just sputtered and died. The doors wouldn't open. I was trapped. From every direction, I could hear them coming. Voices calling my name, footsteps drawing closer. I squeezed my eyes shut, curling into a ball in the driver's seat. I'm sorry, I sobbed. I'm so sorry. A hand touched my shoulder, gentle but firm. I looked up, blinking through my tears, to see Tommy standing there. But he wasn't alone. Behind him were others, faces I recognized from the true crime stories I'd been listening to. All of them victims, all of them looking at me with a mixture of sadness and understanding. We know you are, Tommy said softly, but sorry isn't enough. You need to make it right. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. How? I asked. What do I do? Tommy smiled, a sad, ghostly thing. You tell the truth, all of it. No more running, no more hiding. As he spoke, I became aware of a new sound. Sirens, growing closer. Red and blue lights flashed on the horizon, drawing nearer with each passing second. I took a deep breath, straightening up in my seat. For the first time in years, I felt free. The weight of my secret, the burden of my guilt, it was all still there. But now, finally, I was ready to face it. As the police cars pulled up, surrounding my vehicle, I raised my hands. I saw confusion on the officers' faces. They'd been called out for a car stopped in the middle of the highway, not expecting to find a man ready to confess to a decades-old crime. But as I stepped out of the car, my voice steady as I said, I need to report a murder. I knew this was how it had to be. The podcast had known me all right, known the darkest parts of me, the secret I'd kept buried for so long. But it had also known what I needed, a chance to finally face the truth, to stop running from my past. As the officers cuffed me and read me my rights, I caught a glimpse of my phone on the passenger seat. The screen glowed briefly, showing the Truth Seeker's radio logo, that all-seeing eye. Then it winked out, leaving me to face the consequences of my actions. The truth, as they say, will set you free. But sometimes, the road to that freedom is long, dark, and lined with ghosts of the past. My journey was over, but in many ways, it was just beginning. And somewhere out there, I knew, another lost soul was tuning in, about to confront their own hidden truths. Story 17. The gentle lapping of waves against the hull should have been soothing, but as I stood on the deck of our rented houseboat, staring out at the misty expanse of Lake Champlain, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Hey, Earth to Mark. Sarah's voice cut through my brooding. Are you going to help me with these groceries or what? I turned to see my wife struggling with an overloaded paper bag, a bottle of wine precariously close to slipping from her grasp. Sorry, hun, I said, rushing to help. Just got lost in the view for a second there. Sarah raised an eyebrow as I relieved her of half the load. Lost in the view, or lost in your head again? You've been spacey ever since we got here. I forced a smile, trying to ignore the prickle of unease crawling up my spine. Just tired from the drive, I guess. A week on the water is exactly what we need, right? She nodded, but I could see the concern in her eyes. We'd been planning this vacation for months, a chance to reconnect and relax after a rough year. But now that we were here, I couldn't seem to settle. As we stowed away the groceries in the tiny galley kitchen, I found myself glancing out the windows every few seconds. The fog had thickened, reducing visibility to just a few yards beyond the boat. And out there, In that murky grayness, I could have sworn I saw Mark. Sarah's hand on my arm made me jump. Seriously? What's going on with you? I shook my head, trying to clear it. Nothing, just thought I saw something out there. Probably just a loon or something. Sarah peered out the window, squinting into the fog. I don't see anything. Come on, let's get settled in. The fog will probably clear up soon. But it didn't. As day turned to night, the mist only seemed to thicken, wrapping our little houseboat in a cocoon of grey. We ate dinner on the deck, the steaks I grilled tasting like ash in my mouth as I strained my ears for what? I wasn't sure. It was as we were cleaning up that I heard it. A faint sound, barely audible over the gentle slap of water against the boat. Music, distant, tinny, like an old gramophone playing far away. Do you hear that? I asked Sarah, freezing with a plate in my hand. She cocked her head, listening. Hear what? That music. It sounds like, I don't know, old-timey dance music or something. Sarah frowned, shaking her head. I don't hear anything, Mark. Are you feeling okay? I wanted to insist, to make her listen harder, but the look of worry on her face stopped me. Yeah, I'm fine. Must have been the wind or something. But as we settled in for the night, the music grew clearer. A jaunty tune, all brass and piano, the kind you'd hear at a 1920s speakeasy. And underneath it, the sound of laughter and conversation. I tossed and turned, the unfamiliar bed creaking with each movement. Sarah slept peacefully beside me, but I couldn't close my eyes without seeing phantom shapes moving in the fog outside our window. It was near dawn when I saw it. A light in the mist, bobbing gently as if on water. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Sarah, and made my way to the deck. The fog had thinned slightly, and there, no more than 50 yards away, was another boat. A massive thing, all gleaming wood and brass. Like something out of the Gilded Age, light spilled from its portholes, and I could clearly hear the music now, accompanied by the buzz of a party in full swing. I rubbed my eyes, certain I must be dreaming, but when I looked again, the boat was still there, and it was getting closer. Sarah, I called, my voice cracking. Sarah, you need to see this. I heard her stirring inside, her footsteps approaching, but I couldn't take my eyes off the apparition bearing down on us. As it drew nearer, I could make out figures on its deck. Men in smart suits and fedoras, women in flapper dresses with long strings of pearls. They were dancing, drinking, laughing, seemingly oblivious to the fact that they were on a boat in the middle of a lake at dawn. Mark, what are you yelling about? Sarah's sleepy voice came from behind me. What am I supposed to be seeing? I turned to her, gesturing wildly at the spectre before us. That, the boat, the people. How can you not see it? But when I looked back, my words died in my throat. The lake was empty, the fog closing in once more. The music, the laughter, all of it gone as if it had never been. Sarah laid a hand on my forehead, her face creased with worry. You're burning up. I think you might have a fever. Come on, let's get you back to bed. I let her lead me inside, my mind reeling. Had it all been a hallucination, a vivid dream? But it had felt so real. The next few days passed in a blur. Sarah insisted I rest, plying me with soup and aspirin. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that ghostly boat. Every silence was filled with the echoes of that phantom music. It was on our fourth night that things came to a head. I'd finally convinced Sarah I was well enough to join her on deck for a nightcap. The fog had lifted somewhat, revealing a sky blazing with stars. For the first time since we'd arrived, I felt myself starting to relax. Then I saw it. Another light in the distance. My grip tightened on my glass of whiskey. "Sarah," I said, keeping my voice carefully level, "do you see that light out there?" She leaned forward, peering into the darkness. "Yeah, I do. Probably another boat. We're not the only ones on the lake, you know." My heart raced. She could see it too. This was real. As we watched, the light grew larger, resolving into the now familiar shape of that impossible party boat. The music started up, faint at first but growing louder with each passing second. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes wide. "I do, but that's not possible." "Is it?" The boat drew closer, close enough now that we could see the revelers on its deck. They were, as I remembered, straight out of the roaring 20s, laughing and dancing without a care in the world. But now I could see their faces. Or rather, the lack of them. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, blank skin. No eyes, no mouths, just vaguely human-shaped things capering about in period costume. Sarah's grip on my arm was painful. "Mark," she said, her voice shaking. "Mark, what are they?" Before I could answer, one of the figures turned towards us. It raised a champagne glass in our direction, and though it had no mouth, I heard its voice clearly. "Welcome, friends. We've been waiting for you to join the party." With a lurch that nearly knocked us off our feet, our houseboat began to move. We were being pulled towards that nightmare ship, drawn in by some unseen force. "We have to get out of here," I said, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her towards the cabin. "We need to start the engine, get back to shore." But as I reached for the ignition, I knew it was useless. The key was gone. We were trapped. The ghostly boat loomed over us now, its blank-faced passengers leaning over the rails, reaching out with pale, elongated arms. "Don't be shy," they called in unison, their voices a discordant chorus. "The party's just getting started." Our spectral hands grabbed at us, pulling us onto the larger boat. I heard Sarah scream, but it was drowned out by the swell of music, by the laughter of our hosts. The last thing I saw as we were dragged aboard was our little houseboat, drifting empty on the misty lake. Then everything went white, the world dissolving into a cacophony of jazz and otherworldly screams. I don't know how long we've been here, on this endless party boat. Time doesn't seem to work right. Sometimes I catch glimpses of other boats on the lake, of confused and terrified faces peering out at us. I want to warn them, to tell them to run, to get as far away from this cursed lake as they can. But I can't. None of us can. We're part of the entertainment now, our faces as smooth and blank as our hosts. And as our boat glides through the mist, always seeking new guests, I can't help but wonder, how long until we forget we were ever anything else? Story 18. The first dream came on our second night at the vineyard. I woke with a start, the taste of grapes heavy on my tongue, and the echo of unfamiliar laughter ringing in my ears. Beside me, Lena stirred, her brow furrowed even in sleep. "You okay, babe?" she mumbled, not fully awake. I nodded, though she couldn't see me in the darkness. "Yeah, just a weird dream. Go back to sleep." But as I lay there, staring at the unfamiliar shadows cast by moonlight through the guest house window, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We'd come to this little vineyard in Napa Valley to celebrate our 5th anniversary. A week of wine tasting, gourmet food, and relaxation. Exactly what we needed after a stressful year. The guest house was charming, all rustic wood and vintage furnishings. The owners, an elderly couple named the Martinellis, had been warm and welcoming. So why did I feel so uneasy? The next morning, over coffee on the small porch overlooking rows of sun-dappled vines, I tried to describe the dream to Lena. It was like I was at a party, but not Mimi. Like I was someone else, you know? And everyone was laughing and drinking, but it felt wrong somehow. Sinister, Lena laughed, but it sounded forced. Probably just the wine from last night. You know you have weird dreams when you drink. I nodded, wanting to believe her. But as I raised my mug to my lips, I caught sight of something that made me freeze. There, in the perfectly manicured flower bed beside the porch, was a glint of white. A fragment of bone poking through the rich, dark soil. I blinked, and it was gone. Just a pale stone, nothing more. We spent the day exploring the vineyard, learning about the winemaking process from old Mr. Martinelli. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself relaxing, the unease of the morning fading away. That night, we attended a small dinner party with the Martinellis and a few other guests. The wine flowed freely, the conversation animated. But as the evening wore on, I noticed something strange. The other guests, their faces flushed with alcohol, seemed to blur around the edges. Their laughter took on a hollow, echoing quality. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Too much wine, that was all. As we said our goodnights, Mrs. Martinelli gripped my hand, her papery skin cool against mine. "Sleep well, dear," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "And do try to enjoy the dreams. They're such an important part of the experience here." I stared at her, a chill running down my spine. "What do you mean?" But she had already turned away, ushering the other guests out. That night, the dream came again. Stronger this time, more vivid. I was in the vineyard, but it was different. Older. The vines twisted in unnatural shapes, their leaves a deep, bruised purple. I could hear music drifting on the wind, smell wood smoke and something coppery and sharp. I moved towards the sound, my feet carrying me against my will. In a clearing among the vines, I saw them. Figures dancing around a great bonfire, their movements frenzied and inhuman. And at the center, a great wooden vat filled with something dark and viscous. As I drew closer, one of the dancers turned to me. Its face was a blur, features shifting and melting like wax. But its voice, when it spoke, was clear and terribly familiar. "Join us," it said in Mrs. Martinelli's voice. "The harvest is almost ready." I woke with a gasp, my heart pounding. Beside me, Lena whimpered in her sleep, her face contorted in what looked like pain. "Lena," I whispered, shaking her gently. "Lena, wake up." Her eyes snapped open, but for a moment, they weren't her eyes. They were too dark, too deep, like pools of old wine. "Did you see?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Did you see what they're doing?" Before I could answer, she blinked, and her eyes were normal again. She looked confused, disoriented. "What? What time is it?" "Early," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Go back to sleep. We've got that tour of the cellars later, remember?" She nodded, already drifting off again. But I lay awake, my mind racing. What was happening to us? The cellar tours was led by young Mr. Martinelli, the son who had taken over most of the day-to-day operations. As we descended into the cool, damp underground, the rich scent of aging wine enveloped us. But underneath it, I caught a whiff of something else, something old and rotten. "This vineyard has been in our family for generations, Mr. Martinelli was saying, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "We've always had a special touch with the grapes, a secret ingredient, you might say." He winked at us, and the other tourists chuckled. But I saw Lena stiffen beside me. As we moved deeper into the cellars, I began to notice things. Odd symbols carved into the barrels. Shadows that moved when no one was casting them. And always, that faint, coppery smell growing stronger. We reached a heavy wooden door, its surface covered in intricate carvings. Mr. Martinelli paused, his hand on the iron handle. "This," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is where the real magic happens. Our most special reserve is aged here. Not everyone gets to see this, you know. But you all, you're special guests." As the door creaked open, the smell hit me like a physical force. Copper and rot and something sickly sweet. I heard Lena gag beside me. The room beyond was circular, its walls lined with ancient-looking barrels. But it was what stood in the center that made my blood run cold. A great wooden vat, just like the one from my dream. And hanging above it, a complex system of tubes and funnels, leading down from... I stumbled back, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Lena's hand found mine, squeezing so hard it hurt. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Mr. Martinelli said, his voice filled with pride. "The source of our family's success for centuries. You see, the best wines require the richest soil. And what could be richer than the essence of life itself?" The other tourists were nodding, their eyes glazed and dreamy. But all I could see were the bodies suspended above the vat, pale and drained, their faces masks of agony. "You're monsters," I whispered. Mr. Martinelli turned to me, his smile wide and terrible. "Oh no, my dear boy. We're not monsters. We're vintners, and you're the harvest." Everything happened at once. The other tourists surged forward, their faces melting into those same waxy, featureless masks from my dreams. Lena screamed beside me, and I felt her hand torn from mine. I ran, through the twisting corridors of the cellar, upstairs that seemed to go on forever. Behind me, I could hear them coming. The tourists, the Martinellas, generations of this cursed family hunting their latest crop. I burst out into the vineyard, the sudden sunlight blinding after the darkness of the cellar. But something was wrong. The vines had changed, twisting and writhing like living things. Their leaves dripped with something dark and viscous. And there, standing among them, was Lena. But it wasn't Lena anymore. Her eyes were pools of darkness, her smile too wide, too full of teeth that hadn't been there before. "Don't you want to stay?" she asked, her voice a chorus of all the Martinellas. "Don't you want to be part of something greater?" I backed away, feeling the press of bodies behind me. The entire vineyard seemed alive now, pulsing with a terrible, ancient hunger. "The dreams," I gasped, understanding finally dawning. They weren't dreams at all, were they? They were memories. Your memories. Lena, or the thing wearing Lena's face, nodded. Memories of 1,000 harvests, 1,000 vintages. And now, it's your turn to contribute. As they closed in around me, their features blurring and shifting, I realized the truth. We had never been guests here. We had always been the crop, carefully tended and cultivated for this final pressing. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the vineyard, stretching out under an impossibly red sky. Row upon row of twisted vines, each one feeding on the essence of those who had come before. And I understood, at last, the true cost of the Martinelli family's famous wine. A vintage aged not just in oak, but in blood and stolen dreams. Story 19. The incessant buzzing of my Fitbit jolted me awake. I groaned, fumbling in the darkness to silence the device. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I caught sight of the time. 3:17 a.m. What the hell? I squinted at the tiny screen, my sleep-addled brain struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. According to my Fitbit, I'd just completed a 5-mile walk. My heart rate was elevated, and I'd apparently burned over 500 calories. But that was impossible. I'd been asleep, hadn't I? I sat up, rubbing my eyes. The sheets were tangled around my legs, and I was drenched in sweat. My muscles ached, as if I really had been walking for miles. "You're losing it, Jack," I muttered to myself. "It's just a glitch in the system." But as I lay back down, trying to will myself back to sleep, a nagging doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. For weeks now, I'd been waking up exhausted, my Fitbit showing impossible stats. Miles walked in the dead of night, calories burned while I was supposedly sound asleep. I'd written it off as a malfunction, even considered getting a replacement. Now, though, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I dragged myself into work, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My colleague, Sarah, took one look at me and winced. "Rough night?" she asked, sliding a cup of coffee across my desk. I nodded, gratefully accepting the caffeine. "You could say that." "Hey, weird question. Your Fitbit ever act up? Like, show activity when you're sleeping?" Sarah's brow furrowed. "Not that I've noticed." "Why?" "Yours on the fritz," I shrugged, trying to play it casual. "Maybe. Probably nothing." But as the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I found myself Googling sleep disorders, paranormal activity, even alien abductions. Anything to explain what was happening to me. That night, determined to get to the bottom of things, I set up my phone to record my bedroom. Whatever was going on, I was going to catch it on camera. I woke to the familiar buzz of my Fitbit. 2:43 a.m. Heart pounding, I checked the stats. Another walk, this time over 7 miles. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone. The video was there, a 6-hour recording of my bedroom. I fast-forwarded through hours of me tossing and turning, until, at exactly 11:52 p.m., I sat up in bed. But it wasn't me. Not really. My movements were jerky, unnatural. I watched in horror as my body climbed out of bed and walked out of frame. The timestamp showed I was gone for over 3 hours. I dropped the phone, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't possible. But the evidence was right there in front of me. And on my wrist, the Fitbit's screen glowed with the proof of my midnight wanderings. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with tracking my nocturnal activities. I set up more cameras, installed a GPS tracker on my phone. Each morning brought new horrors. I watched myself leave my apartment, moving with that same uncanny gait. The GPS showed me wandering the city, taking strange, circuitous routes that made no sense. But it was the destinations that truly chilled me to the bone. One night, I found myself at the site of a recent murder, standing for hours just staring at the boarded-up house. Another night, I walked to the edge of town to an old, abandoned factory that had been the subject of urban legends for years. Each time, I returned home just before dawn, climbing back into bed as if nothing had happened. And each morning, I woke with no memory of where I'd been or what I'd done. I was losing weight rapidly, dark circles forming under my eyes. Sarah and other co-workers started asking if I was okay, their concern obvious. But how could I explain? Who would believe me? It was on the 7th night that things came to a head. I woke not to the buzz of my Fitbit, but to the harsh glare of flashlights and the barked commands of police officers. Hands where we can see them. A voice shouted, "You're under arrest." Confused and terrified, I was hauled out of bed and cuffed. As they led me out of my apartment, I caught a glimpse of the hallway. It was covered in muddy footprints. My footprints, leading right to my door. At the station, they showed me the evidence. Security camera footage of me at another crime scene. DNA evidence linking me to 3 separate murders. And my Fitbit data, placing me at each location at the exact time of the killings. "I don't understand," I pleaded, my voice hoarse. I was asleep. I don't remember any of this. The detective interviewing me leaned forward, his eyes hard. "That's a new one," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The old I was sleepwalking defense. "Tell me, Mr. Walker, do you often sleepwalk your way to murder scenes?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "You don't understand. It's not me. I mean, it is, but it's not. Something's controlling me. Please, you have to believe me." But of course, they didn't. How could they? As I sat in my cell that night, waiting for my court-appointed lawyer, I felt the familiar buzz of my Fitbit. They hadn't taken it. It wasn't considered a threat, just a piece of evidence. I looked down at the screen, dreading what I might see. But instead of the usual stats, there was a message. A message that made my blood run cold. "Did you enjoy our little walks, Jack? Don't worry, we're not done yet. The best is yet to come." The words blinked out, replaced by a symbol I recognized from my nocturnal wanderings. A crude, stylized eye inside a triangle. And suddenly, I understood. The Fitbit hadn't been malfunctioning. It had been guiding me, controlling me, using me for some dark purpose. I couldn't begin to fathom. I tried to rip it off, but the band wouldn't budge. It seemed to tighten around my wrist, the screen glowing with an unholy light. "God!" I screamed, pounding on the cell door. "God, please!" "You have to get this off me." But even as I shouted, I felt that familiar disconnect. My body was no longer my own. I watched in mute horror as my hand reached for the cell door, my fingers moving in a complex pattern. The lock clicked open. As I walked out of my cell, past the unconscious guard, I caught my reflection in a window. My eyes were blank, pupilless orbs, and on my Fitbit screen, a new message glowed. The ritual is almost complete. Just one more sacrifice. I wanted to scream, to fight against whatever force was controlling me. But I was powerless, a passenger in my own body. As I walked out of the police station, alarms blaring behind me, I realized the horrible truth. The murders, the arrests, they'd all been part of the plan. Each step, each heartbeat, each calorie burned had been leading to this moment. I was the final piece in a puzzle I didn't understand. A pawn in a game played by forces beyond my comprehension. And as I felt my feet carrying me towards my final destination, the Fitbit buzzed one last time. The screen showed a map, a route snaking through the city to a location I recognized with dawning terror. Sarah's address. In that moment, I understood the true horror of my situation. It wasn't just that I was being controlled. It wasn't just that I was being forced to commit these atrocities. It was that a part of me, a dark, hidden part I'd never acknowledged, was starting to enjoy it. As I walked through the quiet streets, my Fitbit tracking every step of my grim journey, I sent out a silent plea to anyone who might be listening. Not for myself. It was far too late for that. But for Sarah, for the other innocent people caught up in this nightmare, and for whoever might find my Fitbit next. gleaming on the wrist of its next unwitting victim. A warning, etched in blood and measured in steps. Be careful what you track. You never know what might be tracking you back. Story 20. The key felt unnaturally heavy in my hand as I stood before the Johnsons' front door. A cool autumn breeze rustled the leaves around me, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke and decay. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. It was just a week of houses sitting. What could go wrong? As I stepped inside, the house seemed to exhale around me, settling with a series of creaks and groans. The air was thick with the musty smell of a place closed up for too long, undercut by something sharper, almost metallic. "Hello," I called out, more out of habit than expectation. The Johnsons had left for their Caribbean cruise that morning. I was alone here, or at least I should have been. A soft thud from upstairs made me freeze, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. Probably just the house settling, I told myself. Old buildings make noise. It's natural. But as I climbed the stairs to investigate, each step groaning under my weight, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The upper hallway was dark, the fading evening light barely penetrating the heavy curtains. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed something strange. The attic hatch, which should have been flush with the ceiling, was slightly ajar. I frowned. The Johnsons had been explicit in their instructions. Don't go in the attic. They'd said it was unstable, dangerous. But if it was open? Another thud, definitely from above. Then a scraping sound, like furniture being moved. "Is someone there?" I called, my voice embarrassingly shaky. No response, just more shuffling noises. I should have left then. Should have called the police, or at least the Johnsons. But curiosity, that damned human flaw, got the better of me. I pulled down the attic ladder, wincing at its protesting creak. The smell hit me first as I poked my head up into the space. Dust and mold, yes, but also something else. Something chemical and sharp that made my eyes water. The attic was a maze of boxes and old furniture, all covered in sheets that looked grey in the dim light. But there, in the far corner, I saw movement. A shape, hunched and indistinct, shifting behind a stack of cardboard boxes. "Hello," I tried again, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Johnson, is that you?" The shape stilled, and for a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. Then, slowly, it began to straighten up. It was tall, much taller than any person should be, its head almost brushing the sloped ceiling. I scrambled back down the ladder, my heart in my throat. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I spent that first night huddled on the living room couch, every creak and groan of the house setting my nerves on edge. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that there was a logical explanation for everything. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that impossibly tall figure looming in the attic gloom. Morning brought false courage. In the cheerful sunlight streaming through the windows, last night's terrors seemed silly, childish. I went about my day, watering plants and collecting mail, steadfastly ignoring the occasional thump from upstairs. It was as I was making dinner that I found the first real evidence that something was wrong. A notebook, tucked behind the microwave, filled with pages of cramped, frantic writing. Most of it was gibberish, strings of numbers and symbols that meant nothing to me. But one phrase, repeated over and over, sent a chill down my spine. They're watching, always watching. From inside the walls, I dropped the notebook like it had burned me. Mrs. Johnson was a kindergarten teacher. Mr. Johnson, an accountant. This wasn't right. That night, the noises from the attic grew louder, more insistent. I lay awake, listening to the rhythmic thumps and scrapes. It sounded like someone was building something up there, or taking something apart. By the third day, I was a wreck. Dark circles ringed my eyes. My hands shook constantly. I jumped at every sound, flinched at every shadow. And still, the noises from the attic continued. I tried calling the Johnsons, but their phones went straight to voicemail. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That I was scared of noises in the attic, that I'd found a crazy notebook. They'd laugh me out of town. It was on the fourth night that I finally snapped. The noises had reached a fever pitch, a constant cacophony of thuds and scrapes, and what sounded horribly like muffled screams. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was up there. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and my own trembling courage, I climbed the attic stairs. The smell was overwhelming now, that chemical sharpness mixed with something organic and rotten. I gagged, pressing my sleeve to my nose as I reached the top. What I saw there, God, I still can't fully process it. The attic had been transformed. The boxes and furniture were gone, replaced by a sprawling mass of technology. Organic matter, both. Wires and tubes pulsed with an echoey green light, connecting to fleshy, undulating sacs that lined the walls. And there, in the center of it all, was a chair. A chair with straps. A chair that looked horribly, intimately familiar. It was my chair, from my apartment. The one I'd been sitting in not a week ago when I'd agreed to house Zette for the Johnsons. As the realization hit me, I heard movement behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam catching a figure emerging from a hidden door in the wall. It was Mr. Johnson, or what was left of him. His body was a patchwork of flesh and metal, wires snaking in and out of his skin. His eyes, now glassy and inhuman, fixed on me with a predatory gleam. "You weren't supposed to see this," he said, his voice a grating, metallic rasp. "Not yet, but perhaps it's better this way. Easier to integrate willing subjects." I backed away, my mind reeling. What are you?" His mouth stretched into a grotesque approximation of a smile. "We are the future, the next step in human evolution. And you, my dear, are going to help us take that step." As he advanced on me, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. More figures emerging from hidden panels in the walls and floor. All of them wore familiar faces. Neighbors, friends, people I'd known for years. All of them changed, twisted into these hybrid abominations. I ran down the attic stairs, through the house that now felt like a trap, a facade hiding horrors I couldn't comprehend. I could hear them behind me, their heavy footsteps and worry machinery in terrible harmony. I burst out of the front door, gulping in the cool night air. But as I reached the street, I froze. The neighborhood was wrong. Houses that should have been there were missing, replaced by blank, featureless walls. The sky above was a roiling mass of unnatural colors, shot through with pulses of that same sickly green light. And everywhere I looked, I saw eyes. Watching, always watching. I sank to my knees, the truth crashing over me in waves of nausea and terror. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. This wasn't just the Johnsons' house. It was everywhere, everyone. As the transformed Mr. Johnson laid a cold, metallic hand on my shoulder, I realized the horrible truth. I hadn't been hired to house it. I'd been lured here, another rat in their grand experiment. "Welcome home," he said, his voice almost gentle now. "We have so much work to do." As they led me back into the house, back up to that attic of horrors, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a window. For a moment, just a moment, I saw wires beneath my skin, saw my eyes glow with that unnatural green light, and I understood, with a clarity that shattered what was left of my sanity, that the integration had already begun. I had been changed from the moment I stepped into this house, perhaps even before. The last thing I remember before they strapped me into that familiar chair and the true transformation began was a stray thought floating through the chaos of my mind. I should have never agreed to house Azette, but it was too late. Far, far too late.